Have you ever just stopped and thought about how you learn? I mean, really thought about it. Because the way you learned as a kid is completely different from how you learn now, right? Well, there's a huge, fascinating reason for that. And today, we're going to unpack the one big idea that explains it all: developmentalism.
So, let's start with a puzzle that every single one of us has lived through. The fact that learning is, well, it's a moving target. As a kid, you learn by doing, right? Playing with blocks, getting your hands dirty. But now you can grasp these incredibly complex ideas just by reading a book. It's not just that we get smarter, our entire operating system for understanding the world gets a complete overhaul as we grow.
And that brings us to the core question of this whole explainer: why? Why does learning change so dramatically? How can a 5-year-old's brain be this incredible sponge for language, just soaking it up, while a 25-year-old is way better at connecting abstract, complicated dots? What is actually shifting inside of us?
And this right here just lays it out perfectly. On the left, you've got your 5-year-old learner. It's all about touching, doing, seeing concrete things. Active exploration is the name of the game. Then, over on the right, the 25-year-old is playing on a totally different field. We're talking abstract thought, pulling from past experiences, and even thinking about things that haven't happened yet. They're two totally different learners. So what's the bridge between them?
Well, the answer is in this idea of a blueprint, the developmentalism blueprint. This is the framework that shows us that all these changes, they're not random at all. They're actually part of a predictable, built-in sequence of growth that we all go through.
So what exactly is developmentalism? At its heart, it's the theory that our ability to learn unfolds in these very distinct stages. And these stages aren't just pulled out of thin air. They are directly tied to our biology, our cognitive abilities, and even our emotional maturity. You really can't separate one from the other. They're all woven together. To put it as simply as possible, learning and growth are two sides of the very same coin. I mean, think about it. You can't teach advanced calculus to a toddler, and it's not because they aren't smart. It's because their brain literally hasn't built the hardware for that kind of abstract thinking, yet. Our biological maturity basically sets the stage for what our minds can handle. And the whole process breaks down into this really clear 3-step sequence. First, you've got the biological maturation. Your brain and your body are physically growing. That growth then unlocks new cognitive abilities, new ways of thinking. And the result? A total transformation in how you learn and see the world. It really is like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's that profound a change.
Now, of course, this incredible blueprint wasn't just discovered lying around. It was meticulously mapped out by some true pioneers of the mind. So let's meet the key architects behind this whole theory.
You can kind of see how the idea snowballed over time. The whole thing really kicks off back in the 20s and 30s with two absolute giants, Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky. They laid the groundwork. Then, later on, thinkers like Erikson and Kohlberg took that foundation and ran with it, applying the same idea of stages to our social lives and even our moral compass. Let's just zoom in on those first two for a second because their ideas are so fundamental. Piaget, on the one hand, was completely fascinated by the individual's internal journey, how a child kind of builds their own understanding of the world. But then Vygotsky came along and added this absolutely critical piece. He said you can't ignore the social world. Learning is profoundly shaped by our parents, our teachers, our friends, our culture. Really, they're just two sides of the same coin. Okay, so Piaget's big idea was these distinct cognitive stages. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like leveling up in a video game. First, you can only learn through your senses. Then, boom, you unlock symbolic thought. After that, you level up to logical reasoning. And then finally, you reach the final level, abstract thought. And here's the kicker. You can't skip a level. You have to go through them in order. Then you have Vygotsky, who gave us this absolutely brilliant concept called the zone of proximal development, or ZPD. He said the real magic of learning happens right in that middle space, that sweet spot between what you can already do by yourself and what's still impossible. It's in that zone, with a little help from someone who knows more, that you make the biggest leaps.
Now, it's so important to remember that these psychological stages aren't just, abstract concepts. They are powered by something very real, very physical, the incredible ongoing growth and rewiring of our own brains. And that is the absolute key to all of this. We're not just talking about some philosophical idea here. We're talking about the biological reality of how our neural hardware actually develops over time. That development is what sets the stage for everything else. And just look at some of these hardware upgrades our brains get.
The prefrontal cortex, think of it as your brain's CEO, matures, giving you better focus and memory. Then in your teenage years, this thing called synaptic pruning happens. It's basically like your brain cleaning up old, unused apps on your phone to make the whole system run faster and more efficiently. And the most amazing part? Neuroplasticity, the brain's incredible ability to keep rewiring itself, which means we never, ever truly stop learning.
Okay, so this is all really cool theory, but why does it matter today, right now? Well, it matters because these century-old ideas are, quite literally, the bedrock of modern education.
You can draw a direct line from these principles to how we teach and learn today. Piaget's idea of stages, that's what inspires differentiated instruction, not teaching every kid the same way, but based on their own readiness. Vygotsky's ZPD, that's the secret sauce behind those AI tutors that adapt to your skill level, always giving you a problem that's just hard enough. And the whole idea of lifelong growth leads to metacognitive training, which is really just the skill of learning how to learn better.
And this isn't some niche academic idea. Get this, a staggering 85% of educators say that understanding these developmental stages is absolutely critical to being an effective teacher. It's not just theory, it's the foundation of what works in the real world.
So let's wrap this up by bringing it all back, home. Back to you. What's the big takeaway for your own personal journey of learning?
I think the most important thing to remember is this. Learning is not a race. It's not a competition to see who can collect the most facts. It is a natural, deeply human process of growth. And it's a reminder to be patient with ourselves and with others, and to recognize that we are all on our own unique developmental path.
This quote from our source material just says it all so perfectly. The whole point is to keep learning humane, personalized, and deeply aligned with the natural rhythms of human growth. It's about working with our nature, not against it.
Which leaves us with one final thought. You know, with all this incredible new technology and AI, the big question isn't just what we can learn anymore. The real question is, how can we design these amazing tools to respect and support our natural human journey of growth? Something to think about.
Learning. It's kind of like this giant, complex puzzle we're all trying to figure out, right? We think if we just sit and stare at all the little pieces long enough, the picture will eventually magically come together. But what if the real secret isn't about staring at the pieces alone, but who you're building that puzzle with? Let's dig into that.
Oh man, we've all been there. You're staring at a textbook or a screen full of code or just some really tough problem, and you feel like you've just slammed into a brick wall. And it seems like the harder you try to just power through it by yourself, the more stuck you get.
You know, a lot of our culture loves this myth of the lone genius. You know, the eureka moment that happens when someone's all by themselves in a lab or under a tree. But the reality of how our brains actually grow, how we master new skills, it's completely different. It's not about being isolated. It's all about interaction. And the person who just brilliantly flipped this whole script was a Russian psychologist named Lev Vygotsky. Now, his life was cut short, but his ideas were absolutely revolutionary. He suggested that learning isn't something that just happens inside our heads. Nope. It's something that moves from the outside in. This is the absolute heart of his sociocultural theory, and it's such a powerful idea. Our thinking isn't some fixed internal thing. It's constantly being shaped by our conversations, our culture, and the very language we use. For Vygotsky, learning is the engine that literally drives our development. And Vygotsky himself put this so perfectly. He said that every single complex skill we develop, from solving problems to thinking critically, it shows up first on a social level, between people, long before we ever absorb it and make it part of our own thinking. He actually had a name for this process: internalization. Just think about it. A new idea is first explained to you, maybe you discuss it with a friend, or you debate it in a class. It exists in that space between you and someone else. Then, after a while, that whole external conversation, it becomes your own internal dialogue. It literally becomes how you think. So this begs a really important question. If learning happens with other people, where's the sweet spot for that growth? Well, Vygotsky gave us a map, and it leads to this place he called the magic learning zone.
All right, so let's start with a baseline. This circle right here, this is everything a person can already do, all by themselves, no help needed. Let's imagine a student, we'll call her Maya. She's totally comfortable with basic addition, That's her current zone of ability.
But what about her potential? What's she capable of? Well, with just a little guidance from her teacher, maybe a small hint or a quick example, Maya suddenly realizes she can start figuring out linear equations. Now, this is something she absolutely could not do on her own just a few minutes ago.
And that space right there, that gap between what Maya can do alone and what she can do with help, that is the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD. It's this amazing fertile ground where the most powerful learning happens. Why? Because you're being stretched just a little bit beyond your limits, but with exactly the right support. So how do we make that zone work? What are the key ingredients? Vygotsky pointed to two critical pieces that make up our learning support system. Let's break them down.
First up, you need a more knowledgeable other, or an MKO. And listen, this doesn't have to be a formal teacher in a classroom. It can be anyone who knows more than you do about that one specific thing. A classmate, a mentor, your coworker, or, yeah, in today's world, it can even be a really smart AI tutor. And what does this MKO provide? They give you something called scaffolding. It's the perfect metaphor, right? Think about building a skyscraper. You need that temporary structure to support the construction. That's what scaffolding is for learning: hints, prompts, feedback. And just like with a building, once you can stand on your own, that scaffolding gets taken away. And the difference this makes is just huge. Let's picture two students, Emma and Jordan. Emma's studying alone. She hits a tough chapter, gets stuck, and just feels completely frustrated. Jordan, on the other hand, joins a study group. A friend acting as an MKO explains that same concept with a simple analogy. And for Jordan, it just clicks. That's not a coincidence. That's Vygotsky's theory playing out right in front of us. But what's the actual tool we're using to build all of this scaffolding? How are we sharing all this knowledge? For Vygotsky, the answer was both simple and incredibly profound. It's language. He saw our use of language as evolving through three key stages. First, there's social speech, just talking to other people. Then, especially as kids, we develop private speech. We start talking ourselves through things out loud. You've definitely seen a kid do this. Eventually, that talking out loud turns inward, and it becomes inner speech, the silent voice in our head that organizes our thoughts. But that private speech, it never really goes away completely. Think about a college student whispering to himself while he's wrestling with a really tough stats problem. He's not just mumbling. He's using language as a tool to structure his own thinking, to guide himself step by step. He's basically internalized the guidance he once got from somebody else. Okay, so this was all dreamed up almost 100 years ago. How does it possibly hold up in our world today? Well, the amazing thing is, Vygotsky's ideas are probably more relevant now than they have ever been.
I mean, just look around you. Every single time you work on a group project or join a study session, you are living Vygotsky's theory. Every online discussion forum, every Google Doc you collaborate on, and yeah, every AI-powered learning app. They're all essentially creating a digital zone of proximal development, filled with countless MKOs. And here's the really cool part. Science is totally catching up. Modern brain scans show us that social interaction literally lights up the learning and language centers in our brain. Vygotsky's intuition that we are fundamentally social learners is now being proven by neuroscience. We're literally hardwired to learn from each other. So, when you boil it all down, Vygotsky's huge idea is this. Learning isn't some destination you arrive at. It's a conversation. It's this dynamic social dance that bridges the gap between what we already know and what we're capable of discovering. It's just fundamentally human. And that brings us to the final thought I want to leave you with from this explainer. Take a second and think about what you're trying to learn or get better at right now. Who is helping you build that bridge? Who is your MKO? And maybe just as important, whose MKO could you be? Let's dive into the architecture of your mind. We're going to talk about what happens when your brain bumps into a brand new idea, one that just doesn't seem to fit. We're going to explore how our brains adapt, rebuild, and get to those amazing aha moments of real, genuine learning. You know that feeling, right? You're learning something new and it just completely clashes with everything you thought you knew. It's this weird kind of mental friction, like your brain's gears are grinding to a halt. Well, here's the secret. That feeling isn't a sign that you're failing to learn. Nope, it's the exact opposite. It's the start of learning. It's a critical signal that your brain is gearing up to grow. And that feeling, it actually has a name. So, let's treat this whole thing like a puzzle. And luckily for us, a brilliant psychologist pretty much gave us the solution a long time ago.
This is where the legendary psychologist Jean Piaget comes in. He identified this exact moment of mental conflict and gave it a name, disequilibrium. And he argued it's not some annoying side effect of learning, it's the essential trigger that forces our minds to adapt.
So here's the key idea. We don't really learn when things are easy and comfortable. Real learning kicks in when we're pushed off balance. That tension forces our brain to resolve the conflict by literally restructuring what it knows. Which, of course, begs the question, how on earth does it do that? Well, Piaget didn't just name the problem. He gave us the blueprint for the solution. He pinpointed two incredibly powerful tools our minds use every single day to adapt and make sense of the world around us. Okay, tool number 1 is assimilation. You can think of this as our brain's default mode. It's all about taking new information and trying to file it away in a mental folder, or what Piaget called a schema that we already have. So picture a toddler who has a schema for doggy, 4 legs, furry, has a tail. The first time they see a cat, they point and yell, "Doggy!" They're assimilating, trying to fit this new creature into an existing box. But what happens when that new information just refuses to fit? That's when tool number 2, accommodation, has to take over. When someone says, "No, sweetie, that's a cat, it meows," the doggy box doesn't work anymore. The child has to actually change their mental library. They accommodate by creating a whole new cat schema. And that is where the deep learning happens. So let's just break that down. Assimilation is about fitting in. It just adds to what you already know, reinforcing your current ideas. But accommodation, that's about rebuilding. It fundamentally changes what you know and creates an entirely new ways of thinking. One is about keeping things the same, the other is all about transformation. And what's so fascinating is that these two tools are so fundamental to how we think, they're actually studied by 2 different major fields of psychology. They're both looking at the exact same process, just through a completely different lens. So on one side, you've got developmentalism. These folks are looking at the big picture, how our thinking matures over our entire lifetime. For them, assimilation and accommodation are the engines that drive us from childlike thinking to adult reasoning. Then you've got cognitive psychology. They're zooming way in, looking at the here and now. They see these tools as the brain's moment-to-moment software for updating information, whether you're 5 years old or 50. So which is it? Is this all about long-term childhood development, or is it about the little learning moments we have every day? Well, the beautiful answer is, it's both. These aren't competing ideas at all. They're just 2 different views that show us how powerful and universal Piaget's concepts really are. Okay, that's enough theory. Let's make this super concrete. Let's see how this whole process plays out for a college student. We'll call her Dana. Okay, so check this out. Dana starts her psych class with a really simple idea. Memory is basically a storage box. Easy enough. But then, bam, disequilibrium hits. Her professor starts talking about working memory as this active, dynamic process, and that just completely shatters her simple box model. She's forced to accommodate. She has to rebuild her entire understanding to include these new, weird concepts like chunking and rehearsal. And the result? A total transformation. Her schema evolves from a simple box into a complex, sophisticated workspace. And Dana's story is so important because it shows us this cycle isn't just for toddlers learning about cats and dogs. This is it. This is the fundamental process of all deep learning at every single stage of our lives. So why does any of this matter? Well, because it gives us a blueprint for how to actually learn effectively. It tells us to embrace that uncomfortable feeling of disequilibrium. It encourages us to find those challenges that are just beyond our current comfort zone. It's a huge reminder that real learning isn't passive. It's an active and, sometimes uncomfortable process of rebuilding what we thought we knew. So if you take away just one thing from all this, let it be this. Your mind is not a static file cabinet. It's a living, dynamic system. It's constantly in a state of negotiation between what it already knows and what it's just now discovering. That, right there, is the architecture of learning. And that kind of leaves us with one final question to chew on. Think about it. At work, in something you're studying, or maybe just something you read online. What old idea, what mental model are you in the process of accommodating and rebuilding right now? Something to think about.
Hey there. Have you ever really stopped to think about how we learn? I mean, really learn. Not just, memorizing stuff for a test, but how we build our entire picture of the world right from scratch? Well, today we're diving into the incredible work of Jean Piaget. He was a psychologist who basically showed us that we're all the architects of our own minds.
Okay, so let's jump right in with a classic example. I'm sure you've seen this happen, right? A little kid sees a cat for the very first time, and with total 100% confidence, they point and yell, "Doggy!" It's adorable, of course, but what's really going on in that little head? According to Piaget, this isn't just a simple mistake, it's actually the sound of a brain hard at work. It's that child's mind actively, and pretty logically, trying to make this new thing fit into the world they already understand. It's literally construction in progress.
And that's our first big idea. The mind is a builder. You know, this whole concept that the mind is an active participant, it was totally revolutionary at the time. And the guy behind it all was the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget.
See, before Piaget, most people thought kids were just, well, little sponges, just passively soaking up information. But Piaget completely flipped that idea on its head. He said, no, we don't just absorb knowledge, we build it. His theory is called constructivism, and the core idea is that we are all constantly exploring, experimenting, and building our own mental frameworks to make sense of the world.
All right, so if we're builders, then what are our tools? What's in our cognitive toolkit? Well, Piaget identified a few fundamental tools our minds use for this whole lifelong construction project. Okay, the most basic tool, the absolute foundation, is something called a schema. Just think of it as a mental blueprint, or like a category, or even a file folder in your brain for organizing information. So, for that little kid we talked about, their dog schema is probably pretty simple. It's furry, it has 4 legs, and it has a tail. That's their working theory of dog.
So what happens when they see a different kind of creature? Let's say it's a giant Great Dane. It looks way different from a poodle, but hey, it still ticks all the boxes, right? Furry, 4 legs, tail. Check, check, check. So they can just slot this new info right into their existing dog schema. This process, fitting new stuff into the containers you already have, is called assimilation. It's like dropping a new document into a folder you've already made.
But what happens when something new comes along that doesn't fit? Something that totally breaks the rules of your existing folders? Now this is where the real magic of learning happens. It's a process called accommodation. And it's way more challenging, but also way more powerful. Because you're not just adding to a folder, you're changing the folder itself. It's like that moment you learn a whale swims in the ocean, but wait, it's not a fish, it's a mammal. Whoa. That forces you to completely rewrite or accommodate your whole idea of what mammal even means.
So, let's break it down real simple. Assimilation is when you fit something new into an old box you already have. You see a Great Dane, you call it a dog. Easy. Accommodation is when you realize the old box doesn't work and you have to build a new one. That cat is definitely not a dog. So boom, you create a whole new cat box. And that is where the really deep learning happens.
Now, what drives this whole process? Well, Piaget said it's our brain's natural desire for balance, a state he called equilibration. Think about it. You start off in a nice, comfy state of equilibrium where your mental boxes make sense of the world. Then, bam, you run into something that doesn't fit, and it throws you into disequilibrium. It's that confusing, slightly uncomfortable feeling. And that feeling is what motivates you to adapt, to accommodate, until you've created a new, better understanding. You're back in balance, but at a higher level. This cycle, right here, is the engine of how we grow smarter.
Okay, so Piaget didn't just give us the tools. He also gave us a kind of roadmap. He mapped out the major phases of this mental construction project, proposing that we all pretty much go through 4 distinct stages of development as we grow up.
And here's that roadmap. It starts with the sensory motor stage, then moves to pre-operational, then concrete operational, and finally formal operational. You can think of each stage as a massive software update for your brain, each one fundamentally changing your ability to think and reason.
So first up, from birth to about 2 years old, we're in the sensorimotor stage, and it's all about the senses. Learning is totally physical. Babies are figuring out the world by touching, tasting, grabbing, and moving. The huge breakthrough here is something called object permanence. That's the big aha moment when a baby finally gets that even when they can't see something, like mom's face in a game of peekaboo, it still exists. It hasn't just vanished forever.
All right, next up, from about 2 to 7 is the pre-operational stage. This is when language just explodes, and so does imagination. Suddenly a cardboard box isn't just a box, it's a rocket ship. But thinking is still really egocentric, and what that means is A kid at this age literally has a hard time understanding that you, sitting across the table, don't see the world from their exact same point of view.
Then, from around 7 to 11, things get a major upgrade with the concrete operational stage. This is when logical reasoning really starts to kick in. They can finally grasp ideas like conservation. You know that famous experiment where you pour water from a short, fat glass into a tall, skinny one? They get that it's still the same amount of water. But, and this is key, their logic is still very much tied to concrete, real-world stuff they can actually see and touch.
And finally, from about age 12 on up, we hit the formal operational stage. This is the big leagues of thinking. Now we can grapple with totally abstract ideas like justice, or love, or morality. We can think hypothetically, asking those big what-if questions, and we can even start thinking about our own thinking, which is a cool skill called metacognition.
So, that's the theory. A lot to take in, I know. But how does this stuff actually play out in the real world? Let's take a look at learning in action, from something as simple as toy cars all the way up to our biggest ideas.
Okay, so let's meet Leo. Leo is 7 and he's obsessed with his toy cars. And from playing with them, he's built a pretty simple schema in his head. Heavier cars go faster, right? It just makes sense to him. It feels true.
But then one day he actually puts his theory to the test. He gets a ramp, he takes a heavy car and a light car, and he lets them go. And they tie. They hit the bottom at the exact same time. Wait, what? That right there is cognitive conflict. His brain is in disequilibrium. His model of the world is broken. So that uncomfortable feeling forces him to accommodate, to change his schema. He starts to realize, oh, okay, maybe it's not just about weight. Maybe the shape of the car matters or how steep the ramp is. He's just built a brand new, more complex schema. That's Piaget's theory right there in action on the playroom floor.
And listen, this process doesn't just stop when we're kids. It happens our whole lives. Let's meet Maya. She's in college, and she has a schema that a lot of us have. She believes intelligence is fixed. You're either born smart or you're not.
Then, in one of her classes, she learns about neuroplasticity, this incredible idea that our brains can actually change and form new connections based on effort and practice. Well, that new information clashes directly with her old belief, right? It creates that same feeling of disequilibrium. And so she has to accommodate. She has to update her old schema, throwing out the idea of fixed intelligence and adopting a growth mindset. You see? The process is exactly the same for her as it was for Leo and his toy cars.
So why does any of this still matter? I mean, Piaget did this work a long time ago. But his ideas aren't just some historical footnote. They are a powerful blueprint for how we should think about education and really about learning our entire lives.
And you know, Piaget himself said it best. He said the whole point of education isn't to create people who can just repeat what past generations have done. It's to create people who are capable of doing new things. It's about building minds that can innovate and create. It's about raising explorers, not just parrots who can repeat facts.
And all of this leaves us with one final, big question. For you, if learning is an active process of building, an act of creation, then what's one part of your own mental blueprint that might be ready for a little redesign? What's one belief you hold that it might be time to challenge?
Have you ever really stopped to think about how we learn? I mean, how we go from being a baby who can barely figure out their own hands to an adult who can understand, astrophysics or poetry. For a long time, two heavyweights in psychology, Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky, had two totally different answers. And today, we're diving right into their great debate.
It really all comes down to this one huge question. What comes first, our development or our learning? Think about it. Does our brain have to physically mature to a certain point before we can understand a new idea? Or is the very act of learning what pushes our brain to grow and develop in the first place? This is the fundamental clash between our two thinkers. All right, so first up we have Jean Piaget. He basically gave us the first real roadmap of how our minds grow. You can kind of picture it like a developmental ladder.
For Piaget, the idea was pretty straightforward. Development has to come first. It's a prerequisite. You can't just teach a 5-year-old abstract algebra. Why? Because their brain simply isn't there yet. They have to climb up to the right rung on that developmental ladder before that kind of learning is even on the table. And Piaget mapped out this ladder with 4 big stages that he believed every single child goes through, in this exact order. It kicks off with the sensory motor stage. That's babies, learning about the world by touching and tasting everything.
Then you've got the pre-operational stage, where toddlers start using symbols and language. But their logic is, well, it's not quite there yet. After that comes the concrete operational stage, where kids can finally think logically, but mostly about real, tangible things. And finally, we hit the formal operational stage, where we can start thinking abstractly about what-ifs and bigger ideas. For Piaget, it was a predictable, step-by-step climb.
But then along came Lev Vygotsky. And he looked at Piaget's very neat and tidy ladder and basically said, wait a minute, you're missing the most important part. He thought we were forgetting about all the people who help us climb. So he proposed a totally different model, one powered by what you could call a social engine. And here is Vygotsky's direct challenge to Piaget. He just flipped the whole script. He argued that learning isn't something you have to wait for your brain to be ready for. No, he said learning is the very thing that drives our growth. It's the engine, not the caboose tagging along at the end.
So this is the really critical difference. While Piaget was busy mapping out what develops and when it happens, Vygotsky was way more interested in how it happens. He was fascinated by the actual process, the social interactions, the culture we're in, the language we use, all the stuff that shapes our minds from the outside in. And this focus on the how is what leads us to his most famous concept. Instead of these rigid, one-size-fits-all stages, Vygotsky gives us something much more fluid, much more dynamic, a zone of pure potential. He called it the zone of proximal development, or just ZPD for short. The big idea here is that our potential isn't some fixed level. The ZPD is that sweet spot, that kind of magical space where real learning happens. It's the gap between what you can already do all by yourself and what you could do with just a little bit of help from a teacher, a parent, or even a friend.
Okay, so let's make this real. Imagine two 7-year-olds. One grows up in a home filled with rich conversation, storytelling, and questions. The other grows up with very limited dialogue. Now, Vygotsky would say that even though they're the exact same age, their zones of proximal development, their actual potential for growth, are worlds apart. Their social environment has literally shaped their ability to learn.
Vygotsky saw our development as this amazing transformation. We're all born with what he called elementary functions, the basics like memory and attention. But it's through our social interactions, through cultural tools like language, that these basic functions get transformed into higher mental functions, things like complex reasoning and the ability to control our own thoughts. Okay, so this is all fascinating theory, right? But what does this big debate actually mean for the real world? Well, both of these ideas have massive implications for how we teach and learn in a real classroom. Here's the difference in a nutshell. A classroom based on Piaget's ideas would focus on maturation, basically waiting for the child's brain to be ready for the next thing. But a classroom based on Vygotsky's ideas, that's all about social mediation, actively guiding and shaping that brain through teamwork, conversation, and culture. And you can see the two theories side by side right here. For Piaget, development is this neat, stage-based process. For Vygotsky, it's continuous, it's messy, it's social. And that key question from the beginning? For Piaget, learning follows development. For Vygotsky, learning drives development. And as you can see, these core disagreements just ripple out, creating totally different views on the roles of language, culture, and what we should even be doing in school.
So in practice, a classroom inspired by Vygotsky is buzzing with interaction. Teachers aren't just standing at the front lecturing. They're encouraging students to work together, to talk things out. They provide what's called scaffolding, which is a great word for it. Think of it like temporary support beams that help a student build something they couldn't build alone. It's just enough help to stretch them into their ZPD. And then, once they can do it on their own, you take the support away.
So after all that, who was right? Was it Piaget or was it Vygotsky? Well, the modern view is that that's actually the wrong question to ask. Psychology today has a much more elegant answer that, believe it or not, brings both of their amazing insights together. The way we see it now is that these theories aren't actually fighting each other at all. They're complementary. They're like two sides of the same coin. You could say Piaget gave us the map of cognitive growth, while Vygotsky gave us the method for speeding up the journey. And this idea really just captures it perfectly. Where Piaget mapped the ladder of human reasoning, Vygotsky built the hands that lift us up it. It tells us that development isn't just some biological ladder we have to climb all by ourselves. It's a social journey where we are constantly being lifted up by the conversations, the culture, and the people all around us.
Welcome to The Explainer.
You know that feeling like you're in a specific chapter of your life? Well, today we're going to dive into a really powerful idea from psychology that suggests that's exactly what's happening, that our lives might actually follow a kind of predictable map. So, let's just get right to it. Is there some kind of universal script we're all following, or is everyone's story totally different? Turns out this very question has been a huge deal in psychology for, well, a really long time.
Okay, so to really get this, we've got to rewind. Let's go back to the beginning, to the two absolute pioneers who first tried to draw a map of our inner worlds. And let me tell you, they completely changed the game.
So our story kicks off in the early 1900s with a name you've definitely heard, Sigmund Freud. His ideas, groundbreaking, yeah, but also pretty controversial. Then, fast forward a few decades, and this other guy, Erik Erikson, steps onto the scene and just flips the whole thing on its head.
So Freud, he was really the first one to say, hey, maybe our personalities don't just happen. Maybe they develop in a specific order. He called them psychosexual stages. All that really means is he thought that as kids, our focus on, well, pleasure shifts from one part of the body to another. And how we deal with the conflicts in each of those stages, he believed that's what forges our adult personality.
But Erikson, he looked at all this and thought, there's got to be more to it. He wasn't throwing Freud's ideas out, not at all. He was building on them. He zoomed out, shifting the focus from just our inner drives to how we interact with, the whole social world out there.
And this is where it gets really interesting. For Freud, the story was basically over by the time you were a teenager. But Erikson, he was like, no way, we keep developing our entire lives. He mapped out 8 stages, and each one has this big social hurdle we have to get over. Think about it, that classic teenage struggle of who am I? That's his identity versus role confusion. It just makes so much sense, right?
This whole stages idea was like a wildfire. It was so powerful that it couldn't be contained to just personality. Psychologists started thinking, hey, what else can we explain with this? It became a kind of master key for unlocking all sorts of human growth.
So what about our sense of right and wrong? A psychologist named Lawrence Kohlberg started wondering about that. Does our moral compass develop in predictable stages too? Does it grow up just like the rest of us?
And what he found was pretty cool. He laid out 3 basic levels. When we're little kids, we're in what he called the pre-conventional level. Basically, good is what gets you a cookie, and bad is what gets you a timeout. Simple. Then we grow into the conventional level. We follow the rules because, well, they're the rules. It's about being a good member of society. But he said some of us can reach a post-conventional level. That's where you operate from your own deep, universal principles of justice and rights, even if it means going against the grain.
Okay, so we've got personality, we've got morality. What about what actually gets us out of bed in the morning? Our motivations. Well, yeah, the stage concept was applied there too by a guy named Abraham Maslow. And you've almost certainly seen his famous pyramid.
Yeah, this one. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's brilliant in its simplicity. Think of it like a video game. You can't get to the boss level, that's self-actualization up at the top, until you've completed the levels below it. You've got to have your basic needs met first: food, water, a safe place to sleep. Only then can you start worrying about things like relationships, confidence, and unlocking your full creative potential. It's a ladder we're all trying to climb.
But let's be real. Life isn't always a neat, orderly climb up a ladder, right? It's messy. And pretty soon, other thinkers came along and said, hold on, it's not always that simple. They started adding some really important twists to the story.
A perfect example of this is the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She studied something we all unfortunately have to face: grief. And she found that, yeah, there are stages, but they don't behave like the others we've talked about.
She gave us the famous 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But here's the absolute key. It's not a straight line, at all. With grief, you might jump from anger, back to denial, then skip to depression. It's more like a tangled web than a staircase, which feels a lot more true to life, doesn't it? And then came maybe the biggest plot twist of all, from thinkers like Uri Bronfenbrenner. He basically challenged the whole idea that development is something that just happens inside of us. He argued that who we become is way more about the complex web of systems we live in: our family, our friends, our school, our culture. It's not a solo journey. It's a constant dance with the world around us.
Okay, so let's do a super quick recap of the big players. We've got Freud, who kicked it all off with our childhood drives. Then Erikson, who blew it wide open to cover our whole social lives.
We saw Kohlberg map out our moral growth, Maslow stack up our motivations, and Kubler-Ross show us how messy our emotional journeys can be. Each one gives us a totally different but super valuable piece of the puzzle.
All right, so we've got all these different ideas. Some of them are 100 years old. You might be wondering, why does any of this still matter? With all the debates and new ideas, what's the big takeaway for us today?
Well, it boils down to one absolutely crucial idea. Growth is transformation.
What all these thinkers were really getting at is that growing up isn't just about filling our heads with more stuff. It's not about accumulation. It's about transformation. Each new stage is like getting a new pair of glasses. It fundamentally changes how you see the world, not just what you see in it.
And this isn't just some dusty old textbook idea. It's everywhere. It's why great teachers don't just lecture at a 6-year-old the same way they do a 16-year-old. They know they have to meet students where they are. It's even the secret sauce in modern AI tutors that can figure out exactly what stage of learning you're in and adapt to you. Pretty cool, huh?
So in the end, it doesn't really matter if life is a straight line or a tangled mess. What these roadmaps give us is a language to understand our own journey. They help us make sense of the chapters we've already lived, and maybe more importantly, they get us thinking about who we want to be in the next one. So the real question isn't just what you've learned on your journey, but how you've learned to see. What stage is next for you?
Okay, so have you ever felt like you're just following a script someone else wrote for your life? Well, today we're going to look at a kind of blueprint for human development, one that can really help you make sense of your own journey. And here's the kicker. It shows that growing as a person, well, that doesn't stop when you get a diploma. It's a lifelong thing. So let's ask a really big question. When does personal growth actually stop? I mean, seriously, think about it. Is it when you finish high school or college? A lot of us kind of assume it's when we're officially grown up, when childhood is in the rearview mirror. But there was this one pioneering psychologist who had a completely different and way more hopeful idea.
And his name was Erik Erikson. His answer to that big question? It doesn't. Simple as that. For him, our development, our growth, it's a lifelong adventure. He saw our lives as this continuous journey, just filled with these unique challenges and, more importantly, amazing opportunities to grow at every single stage. So what Erikson gave us is what you could call a psychosocial blueprint. Think of it like a map for life. It's this really powerful guide that lays out our search for who we are, for identity, for real connection, and for a sense of meaning, not just when we're young, but for our entire lives.
Now, to really get why Erikson's idea was such a game changer, you have to look at what others were saying. You had folks like Freud, who was really focused on our biological drives, right? Then you had Piaget, who was all about how our thinking develops as we grow up. But Erikson, he was looking at something different. He was fascinated by how we as social creatures figure out who we are. His big question was, in a world full of people, how do we become us? Okay, so let's actually take a look at this map. What does this blueprint of our lives look like? Well, Erikson broke it down into 8 stages, and each one comes with its own core challenge we've got to work through to keep growing. And here they are, all 8 stages, taking us from the very beginning of life all the way to our later years. Each one is like a building block for the next. Now, we're not going to dive deep into all of them today. Instead, we're going to zoom in on 2 that are absolutely critical for navigating college and young adulthood. That's Stage 5, identity versus role confusion, and Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. Before we go on, I want to point out a really key word here, crisis. When we hear that word, we usually think of a disaster, right? But for Erikson, that's not what it meant at all. A psychosocial crisis isn't a catastrophe, it's a turning point. It's like a fork in the road, a crucial moment where we have this amazing opportunity to grow.
All right, so that brings us to the first big one we're talking about today. The huge core challenge of adolescence and young adulthood. Literally figuring out who you are.
Yeah, this is the question, isn't it? Who am I and where am I going? This is the absolute heart of Stage 5, identity versus role confusion. It's that time in life that's all about exploring. You're trying on different hats, different beliefs, different versions of your future, until eventually you start to make some commitments.
Let's make this real. Take the story of Maria. She heads off to college as a pre-med major, mostly because, that's the path her parents wanted for her. But then, bam, she takes a psychology class and something just clicks. She finds a real passion. So she starts questioning everything. Is the life her parents want the same as the life she wants? That old journey, from their path to her own path, is a perfect example of this identity struggle.
And what's the reward for navigating that tough process? It's developing the virtue of fidelity. Now, this doesn't just mean being faithful to other people, it's about being faithful to yourself. It's that inner strength to stick to your own values and be true to who you are, even when it's hard.
So, once you start getting a solid handle on who you are, a whole new challenge pops up. Okay, you have this sense of self. Now what? How do you share that person with others without losing them?
And that is the defining question of stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. Can I be truly close to someone without completely losing myself in the process? And it is so important to get this. Erikson wasn't just talking about romance here. This is about deep, meaningful friendships, close family ties, all of it.
Think about someone like Alex. He's got a pretty solid sense of self. He knows his values, his strengths, but he's scared. He worries that if he gets too close to people, he'll have to give up his independence. The big lesson for him was learning that true intimacy, that real connection, it's not about losing yourself. It's about growing with someone else.
And when you successfully navigate that challenge, you develop the incredible virtue of love. Again, for Erikson, this is way bigger than just romance. It's the capacity to form deep, authentic bonds. It's the ability to commit to people, to build relationships based on trust and respect, all while holding on to that sense of self you worked so hard to build.
Okay, so why does all this matter once you're out of college? Because this whole journey, it never really ends. Erikson's blueprint shows us that our entire life is like a curriculum, and personal growth is a class we're always enrolled in.
The challenges just change as we get older. In middle adulthood, the big question becomes about giving back, about contributing something to the next generation. That's generativity versus stagnation, and it helps us develop care. And then, in our later years, we face integrity versus despair. That's all about looking back on our lives and being able to say, yeah, that was a good life, a meaningful one. And that's where we find wisdom.
You can really see how this is an ongoing process with someone like Jamal. He's a first-generation student, right? So he's got one foot in his family's culture and heritage, and the other in this brand-new college world. He felt torn, but instead of ditching one for the other, he found a way to bring them together, to build an identity that honored his past while embracing his future. He learned that identity isn't something that's just fixed.
And that brings us to what might be the most powerful idea in all of Erikson's work. This idea that identity is not discovered, it's constructed. Think about that. It's not some hidden treasure you have to go out and find. It's something you build yourself, piece by piece, decision by decision, every single day.
So, when you put it all together, what Erikson really gives us is a totally new way to look at life. It's not just a series of random problems we have to solve. It's a curriculum. It's a journey of learning. Each stage is a new lesson, and every time we work through one, we gain a new kind of strength that we get to carry forward with us.
So I want to leave you with a final thought, a question for you to take with you. Looking at this map of life, where are you right now? What's the main psychosocial task you feel like you're working on? Because just knowing where you are on the map, that can be an incredibly powerful tool for navigating the amazing journey that's still ahead.
So when I say the name Sigmund Freud, what pops into your head? A leather couch? Analyzing dreams? Well, today we're diving into one of his most powerful and, yeah, pretty controversial ideas. The theory that our adult personality is basically built on a roadmap that was laid down when we were just kids. Let's trace that map.
It's a question we all kind of wonder about, right? Why do things that happen when we are 1 or 3 or 5 years old still have such a hold on us today? This was the exact mystery Freud was obsessed with solving. And his answer, well, it pretty much changed psychology forever.
It's kind of hard to imagine, but before Freud, people basically saw kids as just smaller, dumber adults. But Freud completely shattered that idea. He argued that childhood isn't just some passive waiting room for adulthood. No, it's this incredibly dynamic, powerful journey, full of its own conflicts and hurdles that literally build the person we become.
So, what does this journey actually look like? Well, Freud laid out a blueprint. He proposed a 5-stage journey where our psychological energy focuses on different parts of the body. He called these the psychosexual stages. And yeah, I know the word sexual gets all the attention, but for Freud, it was really just about physical pleasure and life energy. His whole thing was that getting through each stage successfully was absolutely critical for a healthy personality. All right, so here they are, the big five: oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. Now, the key idea here, and this is a big one, was what Freud called fixation. He believed that if our needs at any one of these stages weren't met, or if they were met too much, we could get stuck, and that stuckness would show up in our personality for the rest of our lives. So let's start at the very beginning.
It all kicks off here, in the first year of life. For a tiny baby, the entire world is centered on the mouth. It's how they eat, of course, but it's also their main source of comfort, of exploring the world, of connection. So the big challenge here is just getting that need for food and security met consistently.
And this is where that whole fixation idea really clicks. If that deep need for oral comfort doesn't get resolved, Freud thought it could pop up later in life. You know, maybe in an adult who's always chewing on pens, or who overeats when stressed, or who just talks a lot. In a way, they're still trying to satisfy that original infant need.
Okay, next up is the anal stage. And look, I know it sounds weird, but for Freud, toilet training was a huge deal. Why? Because it's pretty much the child's first major negotiation with society's rules. It becomes this little power struggle, the kid's desire for control over their own body versus their parents' demands for them to follow the rules.
And depending on how that power struggle goes, Freud saw two main personality types emerging. On one hand, really harsh or stressful toilet training might lead to what he called an anal retentive personality, someone who is super neat, orderly, maybe a little controlling. On the other hand, a super lax approach could lead to an anal expulsive type, messy, disorganized, and maybe a bit rebellious.
Now we get to the most famous, and by far the most controversial stage, the phallic stage. This is where Freud introduced the infamous Oedipus complex. The theory was that kids start to notice gender differences and develop these unconscious feelings of desire for the parent of the opposite sex, and rivalry with the same-sex parent. It's a wild idea, but at its core, it was about a child's new awareness of their place in the family triangle. Okay, let's be real. Almost nobody buys the Oedipus complex literally anymore. But here's the groundbreaking part that we often miss. Freud was the first person to point to this specific age from 3 to 6 and say, hey, something massive is happening here. He argued this is the critical window where our sense of morality, our gender identity, and the whole impulse to be like our parents really starts to form. And that was totally revolutionary.
All right, so after all that drama in the phallic stage, things kind of calmed down. This is the latency stage. Freud thought all that intense energy goes dormant for a while. The focus shifts completely outward. It's all about school, making friends, learning new skills. This is the time for building competence, for figuring out how to be a person in the social world.
And then, bam, puberty hits, and we land in the final stage, the genital stage. All those earlier drives wake back up, but now the goal is totally different. It's not just about self-gratification anymore. The new focus is on forming healthy, mature, give-and-take relationships with other people. For Freud, a person's ability to actually do this successfully really depended on how well they navigated all those earlier conflicts. So that's the journey, in a nutshell. But, his biggest legacy wasn't really the specific stops along the way. It was the idea of a stage-based roadmap at all. That concept created this massive ripple effect that changed psychology forever. And you can see that ripple effect so clearly with these other huge names. Erik Erikson took Freud's stage idea, but he swapped out the focus on libido for social conflicts, like trust versus mistrust. Jean Piaget used that same stage structure to map out how our thinking and logic develops, and Lawrence Kohlberg applied it to how we develop moral reasoning. They all kept the blueprint, but they just built something different on top of it.
Okay, so let's fast forward to today. What's left of Freud's original roadmap? In the 21st century, what do we actually still use, and what parts have we, tossed in the history bin?
It's really a tale of two legacies. On one side, we are all in on his big ideas. The fact that our early experiences are foundational, that so much of what we do is driven by unconscious processes, and that we grow by resolving conflict. But on the other side, we've pretty much ditched the specifics. His obsession with sex as the only motivation, the literal Oedipus complex, and, honestly, the fact that a lot of it just wasn't based on scientific evidence. I mean, just think about it. The entire field of modern attachment theory, that's built on the Freudian idea that our first few years are everything. Neuroscience is constantly proving that our unconscious mind is running most of the show. And the idea that therapy is about working through tension to grow, that's at the heart of so many practices today. His framework, even with its flaws, was an incredible starting point. So when you really boil it all down, the most powerful part of Freud's legacy isn't the oral stage or the anal stage. It's this one simple kind of haunting idea that our past is never really past. It lives on inside of us every single day.
Let me give you a quick modern example. Picture this guy, Jordan. He's 22, a really smart student, and he desperately wants to succeed. But he just cannot stop procrastination. So what's really going on there?
Well, if you look at this through a Freudian lens, a modern therapist might figure this out. Jordan's procrastination has nothing to do with being lazy. It's actually an unconscious strategy to avoid anxiety. Why? Because when he was a little kid, his parents were super strict, and every little mistake was punished.
See, Jordan is unconsciously stuck in a loop, replaying an old childhood conflict. To him, finishing a project means facing judgment, and that triggers all that old anxiety. And that, right there, is the big Freudian echo. Our adult behaviors are so often just reenactments of old childhood problems, and they keep going until we finally drag them into the light and understand where they came from.
And that really brings us to the perfect way to sum it all up. Freud wasn't right about everything, not even close, but he drew the first map. He gave us a structure, a language, to even begin talking about how a person becomes who they are. Everyone who came after him was, in one way or another, just expanding on the map he first dared to draw.
So I'll leave you with this to think about. When you look at your own personality, your habits, your fears, even your strengths, what's on your roadmap that started way back in childhood?
Can you believe that for nearly 50 years, the science of psychology made a wild decision to just completely ignore the mind? It sounds crazy, but it's true. Today we're going to unpack the story of how that happened, why it all fell apart, and how the revolution that came next totally changed our understanding of how we learn.
So, back in the early 20th century, this was the question keeping psychologists up at night. They wanted their field to be a hard science, like physics or chemistry. But there was one huge problem. How do you measure a thought? How do you put a belief under a microscope? You just can't. And this single, tricky challenge set the stage for decades of debate. All right, here's our roadmap for this journey. First, we're going to tackle the black box problem. Then, we'll dive into the world of reinforcement that idea created. Next up, the game changer, the cognitive revolution, which finally cracked that box open. We'll put the two big ideas head to head, and then we'll see how it all comes together to create the modern learner. So, how did they solve that problem of studying the invisible mind? Well, their answer was kind of radical. They didn't. They just decided to ignore it. Completely. And out of that decision came this powerful new way of thinking called behaviorism. This quote from John B. Watson, one of the founders of behaviorism, really says it all. He was like, forget consciousness, forget feelings, that stuff isn't scientific. For him, the only thing that mattered was predicting and controlling behavior. All you needed to study was the thing that happens to someone and the thing they do next. That's it. And this is their most famous metaphor. To the behaviorists, the human mind was a black box. What was happening on the inside, your thoughts, your big ideas, your aha moments, who knows? And more importantly, who cares? They said it was unknowable and, frankly, irrelevant. All that mattered was the input and the output. Now, the most famous behaviorist of them all, B.F. Skinner, he took this idea and ran with it. He argued that our behavior isn't just a simple reaction to something. No, it's actively shaped by the consequences of what we do. And this is where reinforcement enters the picture. Before Skinner, the big idea was classical conditioning. You know this one, Pavlov's dogs. Ring a bell, give the dogs food. Do it over and over, and pretty soon, the dogs start drooling at just the sound of the bell. The dog is a passive learner here. It's just a simple, automatic association. But Skinner's operant conditioning was totally different. In this case, the learner is active. Picture a rat in a box. It's just wandering around, and it accidentally bumps a lever, and bam, a food pellet drops down. The rat's little brain connects the dots, and pretty soon, it's pressing that lever on purpose. The learning isn't about some prior association. It's driven by the consequence of its own action. And the main tool for this shaping is reinforcement. Put simply, it's anything that makes a behavior more likely to happen again. The food pellet, a gold star, your paycheck. In Skinner's view, our entire lives are just this giant complex web of reinforcements, quietly shaping everything we do. You can see this idea perfectly in a 1950s classroom, right? It's all about external rewards and punishments.
You get gold stars for right answers, you lose recess for wrong ones. Drills are rewarded with praise. And hey, this system is actually really good at getting predictable behavior. Kids learn the rules and give the correct answers. But does acing your multiplication drills mean you actually understand multiplication? That was the big question behaviorism just couldn't answer.
And that very question started causing a crisis in the fields. By the 1950s, you had these amazing new fields like computer science and linguistics just exploding. And when they looked at the mind, they didn't see a black box. They saw an information processor. This lit the fuse for the cognitive revolution, a movement determined to finally pry that box open and see what was going on inside.
The really crucial shift here was one of perspective. Cognitive psychologists like Piaget and Brunner said, wait a minute, people aren't just passive sponges soaking up rewards. We are active processors. Our minds are constantly taking in information, organizing it, storing it away, and then pulling it back out to solve problems. We aren't just being conditioned, we are actively thinking. This simple number, this was like the first piece of hard evidence from inside the black box. In 1956, George Miller figured out that our short-term memory has a real, measurable limit. It can hold about 7 pieces of information, give or take 2. This was an absolute bombshell. It was concrete proof that the mind has an internal structure that you could actually study scientifically, the very thing the behaviorists claimed was impossible.
Jean Piaget gave us a fantastic model for how this active learning actually works. So imagine a little kid has a mental folder, a schema that says, all furry four-legged animals are dogs. Then they see a cat, and using that folder, they point and say, dog. That's assimilation. But then someone says, no, sweetie, that's a cat. Now the kid has to create a new folder for cat. That's accommodation. Notice this isn't about rewards. It's about the kid actively building and refining their own understanding of the world. Okay, so let's put these two worldviews right next to each other. This is where the difference between them becomes incredibly clear. Just look at this breakdown. For behaviorism, learning is just a change in what you do. But for cognitivism, it's about building what you know. Behaviorism looks at the external world, cognitivism dives into your internal world. In the behaviorist view, the environment controls you. In the cognitive view, you interpret the environment. This is the huge shift from a teacher-centered classroom to a learner-centered one. So, who won? Which theory came out on top? Well, in the end, it wasn't really a battle to the death. Modern learning science is actually a blend. It recognizes that, hey, both of these views hold a piece of the truth. And here it is, the essential lesson from this whole story. The absolute best learning happens when we combine the two. We use the tools from behaviorism, things like feedback and reinforcement, to build motivation. And we use the tools from cognitivism to build deep, real understanding. Motivation plus understanding, that's what equals effective learning. Let's think about a modern student. We'll call her Emma. Her online course is a perfect example of this fusion. She earns badges and points when she solves problems. That's pure behaviorism, keeping her motivated. But the course also gives her interactive visuals to really understand a tricky formula, and then asks her to apply it to a real-world problem. That's pure cognitivism, helping her build knowledge. So what did we keep from behaviorism? A lot, actually. We still value its focus on scientific rigor. We absolutely know that reinforcement is a powerful, powerful tool for motivation. And maybe most important of all, we held on to the core belief that learning itself can be studied systematically.
And what would we leave behind? Well, we firmly rejected the idea that mental processes don't matter. We moved past the idea that our behavior is only about our environment, because we know our thoughts have power. And we brought back all the crucial human stuff that behaviorism kind of missed, meaning, creativity, and the fact that we learn together. And that brings us to the legacy of this incredible journey. Psychology went from studying things from the outside in, from watching rats in a box, to mapping the very structures of human reason. Our understanding of learning today is this powerful fusion. It's the science of behavior guided by the architecture of thought. So, I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. The biggest lesson from the cognitive revolution is that our beliefs shape our actions. So with that in mind, what's one internal thought you have about your own learning? Maybe it's that you're bad at math or that studying is boring, that if you could change it, could completely transform your behavior. Have you ever really stopped to think about how you became, well, you? You know, the answer to that isn't just in your experiences. It's deep inside the incredible journey of your brain. It's a story that kicks off way before you're even born, and, as we're about to find out, it really never stops. So let's dive into the fascinating world inside our own heads.
Okay, so let me ask you this right off the bat. Do you think your brain is a finished product? Like a masterpiece that's all done and hanging on the wall? Or is it a work in progress, constantly being shaped and reshaped? The answer, I promise you, is going to change how you think about pretty much everything. For the longest time, we've kind of talked about the mind and the brain like they were two separate things. But here's the thing we know now. Every single thought, every feeling, every memory you have is a physical event. It literally rewires the circuitry in your head. Learning isn't some abstract concept. It's a biological process that molds the very core of who you are.
Right, so you can forget that old idea of the brain as some static computer. A much better way to think about it is like a living, breathing rainforest, a vibrant ecosystem that's always changing. Every single thing you experience is like a drop of rain. It nurtures some connections while others just fade away. It's this incredibly dynamic landscape. And guess what? You're the one in charge of the garden.
So, where does this wild journey even start? Let's jump back in time, all the way back to the beginning of life, to see how the brain's first draft gets written. And trust me, it is a masterpiece of biological engineering.
The moment you're born, your brain is already just bursting with potential. I mean, it's packed with 100 billion neurons. To put that in perspective, that's more stars than are in our entire Milky Way galaxy. Every single one is a tiny little spark, just waiting to get connected into the incredible tapestry of your mind.
But, just having all those neurons is only part of the story. The real magic, the absolute explosion of development happens in the connections between them. In your first few years, your brain is a complete whirlwind, forming 2 million new synapses, new connections every single second. Can you even imagine? Every sound, every sight, every touch is weaving the fabric of who you'll become.
Okay, but with all that crazy growth, things could get messy, right? The brain needs a way to get organized and efficient. It can't possibly keep every connection it makes. And that's where something called synaptic pruning comes in. Think of it like a master gardener carefully trimming a bonsai tree, snipping away the weaker, unused connections so the more important ones can grow stronger and flourish.
And this all boils down to the most fundamental rule of the brain. Use it or lose it. It's that simple. The pathways that you use, the skills you practice, the ideas you think about, the people you connect with, those pathways get stronger, faster, more efficient. And the ones you neglect, well, they wither away. Your life, your choices, you are the architect of your own mind.
All right, let's fast forward a bit to one of the most interesting and, let's be honest, chaotic periods of life, the teenage years. And this isn't just about hormones and drama. No, what's really going on is a profound story of a brain in major transition.
So let's meet Jordan. In class, he's amazing, super logical, analytical, can break down any complex argument. But put that same Jordan in a car on a Friday night with his friends, and he becomes a totally different person. Impulsive, thrill-seeking, a complete risk-taker. So what is going on here? Is he just being a hypocrite? Or is there something much deeper happening inside his developing brain?
The answer to Jordan's confusing behavior is right here. It's this fascinating mismatch called developmental asynchrony. Basically, it's like having a race car with a massive, souped-up engine, but the brakes haven't been fully installed yet. His emotional gas pedal, the limbic system, is fully developed and screaming, go, go, go. But his rational brake pedal, the prefrontal cortex, well, that part won't be completely finished until his mid-20s.
So yeah, the whole teenage experience is basically this constant, high-stakes tug-of-war going on inside the brain. It's a battle between the thrill of the now and the wisdom of the future. And that internal conflict, it's the perfect storm for both incredible creativity and some seriously heart-stopping risks. For a very long time, we thought the brain was like clay that hardened after childhood, that you were pretty much stuck with what you had. But then, in one of the biggest paradigm shifts in the history of science, we discovered something absolutely incredible. We found out that we're the sculptors of our own minds, that we have the power to rewire our brains at any age. And this amazing power has a name: neuroplasticity. It's the brain's lifelong ability to forge new connections, to carve out new pathways, to literally reshape itself based on what you do and think. This means learning isn't just about filling up a bucket with knowledge. It's about physically changing the shape of the bucket itself. So how does this whole rewiring thing actually work?
It's actually a pretty straightforward loop. Step 1, you have an experience. Anything, from learning guitar to feeling gratitude. Step 2, that experience makes a specific set of neurons fire together. Then, step 3, you repeat it. You practice that chord again, and those neurons fire together again, strengthening their bond, kind of like forging a path in a forest. And finally, step 4, with enough repetition, you've physically changed your brain. That little path has become a superhighway.
Let's take Lena. She's a brilliant student, but she was just drowning in stress and not sleeping. Her mind felt foggy, tangled up. She couldn't remember anything she studied. Her brain was just flooded with the stress hormone, cortisol. It was literally short-circuiting. But then she made a choice. She decided to prioritize sleep, to get some exercise, to eat better. And she wasn't just feeling better. She was literally remodeling her brain for clarity, for focus, and for success.
So as we start to pull all these threads together, this beautiful, profound picture starts to emerge. We can see that brain development isn't some destination you arrive at. It's a lifelong journey of transformation. And what's so cool is how the latest science is giving us the physical proof for what the great developmental psychologists figured out ages ago.
I mean, think about it. Piaget's famous stages of cognitive development, they perfectly mirror the maturation of our brain networks. Erikson's idea of the adolescent identity crisis, that's a direct result of that limbic system rebalancing we just talked about. Vygotsky's theories about learning from others, that's powered by our brain's incredible mirror neurons. The biology provides the blueprint for the psychology. It all clicks together.
So here it is, the big, transformative takeaway. Every single time you learn a new skill, every time you overcome a fear, every time you build a better habit, you are not just changing your mind, you are performing an act of biological transformation. You are physically, tangibly, miraculously changing your brain.
And this brings us to a really beautiful and empowering idea. The story of our brain shows us that we are not just passive passengers in our own lives. We are the active creators. We are the artists. We're the architects of our own evolution, constantly sculpting the very organ that we use to think and feel and love and dream.
So I'll leave you with this one big question. Knowing what you know now, that every single experience, every thought, every action is another brushstroke on the canvas of your brain. Who are you choosing to become? The power to create your own masterpiece is, quite literally, all in your head. The only question left is, what will you create?
You know, every scar, every laugh line, every song you kind of half remember, they're all chapters in the story of you. And they're all written by your memory. But how is that story even written? How does it all work? Well, let's pull back the curtain and see how our minds build this incredible archive of who we are. Okay, I want you to try something with me. If you can, just take a second. What is your absolute earliest memory? Is it a flash of a birthday party? Maybe the smell of a certain food? That single tiny memory, that's the very first sentence in your life story. And that's our starting point for understanding how this amazing system works.
So here's our game plan. We're going to trace that story through 5 key chapters. We'll start with the mind's basic blueprint, then we'll solve the mystery of why our first memories are totally missing. After that, we'll see how we learn to remember, understand why emotion is basically memory's secret ingredient, and finally, we'll follow memory's journey across our entire lives.
All right, so to understand our own stories, we have to start with the architecture, the library where they're all stored. What's the invisible blueprint inside our minds that even makes memory possible in the first place?
This quote just nails it, doesn't it? Memory isn't some dusty old filing cabinet for facts. It is the engine that turns what happens to us into who we are. Seriously, without it, you just wouldn't be you.
So how does it actually work? Well, you can think of it like a 3-act play. First up, you've got encoding. Your brain is like a translator, taking in everything from the world around you and turning it into a language it can actually understand. Then comes storage, where it files that information away for safekeeping. And finally, the magic moment, retrieval. That's pulling the memory out of the archive and back onto the stage of your mind.
And you know, this isn't happening in some abstract cloud somewhere. This is happening in the physical hardware of your brain. Think of your hippocampus as the librarian. It's the gateway deciding which new experiences get a library card. Your prefrontal cortex is the super meticulous organizer, shelving those memories in all the right places. And then there's your amygdala, which is like an emotional highlighter, marking the most important passages in bright neon. We're going to be coming back to these key players.
Which brings us to our first big mystery. I mean, if we're having experiences from day one, why are the first few pages of our life story completely blank? Let's solve the case of infantile amnesia.
And here's the thing, you are not alone in this. That earliest memory you came up with, I'm willing to bet it wasn't from when you were 1 or 2 years old. This is a totally universal human experience. It's called infantile amnesia.
So what's the culprit? It's basically a developmental mismatch. See, we have two different memory systems. Implicit memory, you can think of it as muscle memory, comes online pretty early. It's the knowing how to crawl, how to grab a toy. But explicit memory, the knowing that, like knowing that this is my mom or that this happened yesterday, that relies on our hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. And in our first few years, those parts of the brain are still totally under construction. The filing system for our life story just isn't built yet.
But our memory isn't just some passive recording device. As we grow up, we actually learn to become the active directors of our own memories. We learn strategies to turn what feels like a flood of raw data into a story that actually makes sense.
So imagine I asked you to memorize this string of numbers in, like, 5 seconds. For a young child, that is a really tough ask. They just see 6 separate, random digits, and that's a lot to hold in your head at once.
But your brain probably didn't see 6 random numbers, right? It saw one thing, the beginning of pi. That's a mental superpower called chunking. Your brain just took 6 separate pieces of information and compressed them into a single, meaningful file. This is how memory champions can memorize whole decks of cards in seconds. It's not about having a bigger hard drive, it's about having way better compression software.
And here's the thing. We don't learn these memory tricks on our own. We're taught. When a parent asks a kid, "So what was the best part of your day?" they're doing so much more than just chatting. They are literally teaching that child how to build a story, how to pick out the important details and put them in order. They're building the scaffolding for a lifetime of memories.
And eventually, we become the masters of our own memory. This is called meta-memory. It's literally thinking about remembering. It's that moment you realize, oh, I'm a visual learner. Or, you know what, I need to say this out loud to remember it. You're not just a student anymore. You've become the professor of your own mind.
But even with all the best strategies, some memories just stick, while others fade away. Why can you remember the lyrics to a song from 20 years ago, but not what you had for breakfast yesterday? The secret ingredient, my friends, is emotion. Let's look at how feelings can write memories in permanent ink.
Believe it or not, a memory is a real physical thing. It's a pathway that's been carved between your brain cells. And every single time you remember something, you're walking down that path again, making it just a little bit wider, a little bit clearer. Scientists call this long-term potentiation, or LTP for short. It's your brain physically changing in response to your experiences. It's wild.
So what helps carve those pathways into stone? Well, sleep is huge. It's like your brain's overnight construction crew, reinforcing all the important connections. A little bit of excitement is like a spotlight, helping you focus on what really matters. But too much stress? That's like a flood that just washes everything away. It's the reason your mind goes completely blank during a high-stakes exam.
And this is where our old friend the amygdala comes back into play. It's basically your brain's bouncer, deciding which memories get into the VIP lounge. When an experience is emotionally charged, the amygdala taps the hippocampus on the shoulder and says, "Hey, this one's important. Record this in 4K. That's exactly why the memories that make your heart race are the ones that last a lifetime.
So we've seen how our memory is built. Now let's fast forward a bit and see how this incredible living archive evolves as we write the later chapters of our lives. You can see from this timeline that our memory is always changing. We start with those blank pages of infantile amnesia. In childhood, we become masters of how-to memory, learning to ride bikes and tie our shoes. As teenagers, our working memory is at its absolute peak. We're juggling a million things at once. In midlife, we're connecting the dots, gaining wisdom. And then in our later years, something really strange and beautiful happens, the positivity effect.
At every single stage of life, we are dealing with something called cognitive load. Think of it like your brain's RAM. If you have too many tabs open at once, everything just slows down. Whether you're a student in a noisy cafe or just trying to follow a new recipe, you are managing your cognitive load. It is a finite resource, and learning to use it wisely is one of life's most essential skills.
And you know, it's a total myth that memory just gets worse with age. Sure, you might forget where you put your keys more often, but the mature brain has some incredible superpowers. Your how-to memory is rock solid. Your internal library of facts and knowledge, it can keep growing forever. And then there's that positivity effect. As we get older, our brains naturally start to focus on the good stuff, kind of like a personal photo editor for our life story, helping us create a happier ending.
So in the end, that's really what memory is. It's the bridge between biology and meaning. It's just a bunch of neurons firing, but somehow that electrical storm creates the story of you. It's the most incredible magic trick in the entire universe.
And that brings us to a really interesting question for our own time. Our phones remember phone numbers, our calendars remember appointments, and the internet remembers, well, everything. As we outsource more and more of our memory to technology, are we changing what it even means to be human? If your memories live in the cloud, are they still yours? It's something to think about next time you ask your phone for directions to a place you've been a dozen times before.
Let's dive into one of the most fascinating, and let's be honest, often baffling topics out there, the adolescent mind. It's this incredible period of growth, packed with intense emotions and decisions that can seem, well, completely illogical from the outside. So, what is really going on in there?
Have you ever just looked at a teenager and thought, how can they be so brilliant one moment and then do something so impulsive the next? It feels like they're a walking, talking contradiction. And you know what? Neuroscience actually tells us that feeling is spot on. I mean, look at this. On one hand, you've got this incredible capacity for deep, abstract thought, for creativity, for really wrestling with big ethical questions. But on the other hand, you've got this tendency for huge risks, wild emotional swings, and decisions that just make you scratch your head. So what on earth explains this disconnect? Well, here's the single most important idea to grasp. The adolescent mind isn't broken. It isn't faulty. It's simply under a massive and kind of messy construction project. And understanding that construction plan is the key to everything.
So, let's put on our hard hat, shall we? We're going to take a look under the hood at this massive neurological remodeling project.
Okay, the easiest way to think about this is the gas pedal versus brakes analogy. In the teenage brain, the limbic system, that's the emotional reward-seeking gas pedal, is fully online and ready to go. It's powerful. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's brake system for reasoning and impulse control, is still being built. It's not going to be finished until the mid-20s. So you've basically got a Ferrari engine with bicycle brakes. What could possibly go wrong?
Now, there are two major processes driving this whole construction project. First up is something called synaptic pruning. Seriously, think of it like a gardener trimming a rose bush. The brain gets rid of the weaker, unused connections so that the remaining pathways can get stronger and way more efficient. It is a classic case of use it or lose it.
And the second process is called myelination. This is where the brain coats its most used pathways with a fatty substance called myelin. This stuff acts just like insulation on an electrical wire, letting information travel much, much faster. So through both pruning and myelination, the brain is getting a massive upgrade. It's becoming both more efficient and more powerful.
You know, this whole internal tug-of-war actually has a scientific name. It's called the dual systems model. It's the perfect description for this constant competition between that fast, powerful emotional system and the slower, still developing control system.
So let's walk through how this plays out in real life. An exciting or emotional situation comes up, instantly, and I mean instantly, the gas pedal, the limbic system, slams to the floor, chasing that thrill, that reward. The brake system, the prefrontal cortex, tries to catch up and say, hey, wait a minute, but it's just slower. And in that crucial time gap, the faster, more powerful emotional system almost always wins. And that right there explains so many of those impulsive moments. Okay, so this brings us to the next huge piece of the puzzle, the high-stakes reward game. Why does taking risks feel so incredibly good during the teenage years? Let's take a look at a real-world example from our source material about a teen named Lila. Now, Lila's a smart, safe driver. But one night, her friends are in the car, and they start cheering her on to speed down an empty road. In that moment, her brain is just flooded with dopamine. And the result? The thrill of acceptance from her friends completely outweighs her rational caution. That is the internal brain battle playing out in real time. And here's the biology behind that feeling. There's a part of the brain's reward center called the nucleus accumbens. And during the teenage years, it is hypersensitive. So exciting experiences, especially social ones, trigger this huge surge of the feel-good chemical dopamine, making those moments feel intensely, unbelievably pleasurable.
This really helps visualize what we're talking about. It's the adolescent reward equation. It's not that teens don't see the risks, they do. It's just that the potential rewards, things like social acceptance or the thrill of something new, they feel so massive that they just weigh more on the scale. Rational caution often just gets pushed to the side.
So here's the crucial reframing. This isn't just recklessness for the sake of it.
From an evolutionary point of view, this is a brain that's been strategically designed to push a young person out into the world, to explore, to learn, to make new friends, and ultimately to leave the nest. It's a feature, not a bug.
So this remodeling project goes way beyond just brain chemistry. It creates entirely new ways of thinking and seeing the world. A new mind is literally unfolding, and with it comes a new sense of self.
Take the story of Marcus, a college student giving a presentation. He is just completely convinced that every single person in that room is watching him, judging his every word, every stumble, even though, in reality, they're all probably just worried about their own upcoming presentations. That feeling is a direct result of his developing mind.
Psychologists have a great name for this. They call it the imaginary audience. As teens develop this new, powerful self-awareness, they often project it onto everyone else. It creates this feeling that you're constantly on stage with a spotlight following you everywhere.
And a close cousin to that is the personal fable. This is the belief that your own feelings and experiences are totally unique and that you're kind of invincible. It's that "it won't happen to me" feeling. And of course, you can see how that feeds right back into the tendency to take bigger risks.
All of this is happening during this critical search for identity, for figuring out who you are. And at a brain level, this is so intense. Peer approval literally lights up the reward centers, while social rejection triggers the same centers in the brain as physical pain. It is no wonder fitting in feels like a matter of life and death, because to the teenage brain, it kinda is.
So how do we pull all of this together? We've seen the neurological blueprint, right? So let's talk about how that blueprint becomes a fully realized human being. And here is maybe the most hopeful part of this whole story. Biology provides the blueprint, absolutely, but it's the environment, the family, the mentors, the supportive relationships that actually directs the construction. A supportive environment strengthens those crucial connections between emotion and reason. It helps build a better set of brakes.
So, what does this mean in practice? Well, it means we shouldn't try to eliminate risk entirely. Instead, we can help channel that drive into productive things, like sports or the arts or ambitious projects. It also means providing the structure and clear boundaries that can basically act as an external prefrontal cortex. And maybe most importantly, it means modeling the very behavior we hope to see.
And we should never ever forget the upside to all this. This entire system, with all its intensity and volatility, is a total double-edged sword. The same brain wiring that leads to those impulsive choices is precisely what fuels incredible creativity, the courage to try new things, and the spark of real innovation. In the end, the adolescent mind is one of evolution's most brilliant designs. Yes, it's a period of messy, challenging, and sometimes frustrating construction, but it is also beautiful. It's a brain that is built not for perfection, but for possibility. And understanding that, well, that can change everything.
Have you ever stopped to think about where your sense of right and wrong actually comes from? I mean, it kind of feels like it's just there, right? But what if I told you our morality isn't set in stone? It actually grows and evolves over our entire lives. And today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating theory that basically maps out that exact journey. All right, let's get right into it. But we're not going to start with a boring lecture. Nope. We're going to start with a puzzle, a really famous ethical dilemma that's going to make you think hard about what you truly believe is right. So, what's your gut reaction here? Just take a second. Should Hines steal the drug? Yes? No? It's a really tough one, and you can make a strong case for either side. Okay, now here's the twist. The psychologist who came up with this whole scenario, a guy named Lawrence Kohlberg, he wasn't actually interested in your yes or no answer. Not at all. He wanted to know why. Your reasoning, the logic you use to back up your choice, that's the key. That's what reveals the secret architecture of your moral thinking. And that's the whole game right there. Kohlberg saw our moral development as a kind of ladder, a series of rungs we climb as we get better and more sophisticated at thinking through tough ethical spots. And here's the thing, every single one of us is on this ladder somewhere. So this ladder has 3 big levels. Down at the bottom, you've got the pre-conventional level. That's where morality is all about outside stuff, like getting punished or getting a reward. Then, in the middle, there's the conventional level, which is all about fitting in with society's rules. And way up at the top, that's the post-conventional level, where your morality comes from your own deeply held principles. So, you ready to climb?
Let's take this ladder one level at a time and see how the reasoning for that whole Heinz problem completely transforms at every single step. All right, we're starting at the bottom rung, pre-conventional morality. Think back to when you were a little kid. This is where we all start. At this level, right and wrong aren't really inside you. They're all about the consequences you get from the outside world. Now, this first level has two parts. Stage 1 is super simple. Right is whatever you can get away with. The thinking is, Heinz shouldn't steal because they'll end up in jail. End of discussion. But then in stage 2, it gets a little more transactional. It's all about what's in it for me. It's a kind of scratch my back, I'll scratch yours logic. Here, someone might say, sure, Heinz can't steal it because getting his wife back is worth the risk of getting caught. Okay, moving on up the ladder. This is the conventional level. And this is where morality gets, well, social. We stop thinking just about ourselves and start focusing on what our family, our friends, and our community expect from us. We start to really internalize the rules of the group. And again, this level splits into two. Stage 3 is what you might call the good person stage. It's all about your intentions and making sure people see you as a good guy. Someone here would say, of course Heinz should steal it. That's what a good husband would do. But then in stage 4, the camera kind of zooms out. It's not just about your immediate circle anymore. It's about society as a whole. It's all about law and order. From this viewpoint, Heinz shouldn't steal, because if everybody just broke the law whenever they wanted, society would fall into chaos. And get this. This is a big one. Kohlberg's research found that most adults stay right here at this conventional level. For most of us, our moral compass is basically guided by what society expects and the need to keep things running smoothly. Only a pretty small number of people keep climbing to that final level. Which brings us to the very top of the ladder, the post-conventional level. This is where morality becomes personal in a whole new way. A person's sense of right and wrong is now defined by abstract principles, values that can sometimes be even more important than the specific laws of the land. At stage 5, you see laws as a kind of social contract. They're useful for society, but they're not absolute. If a law violates a fundamental human right, it needs to be challenged. The reasoning here is, the law against stealing is less important than the fundamental right to life. Then, at the absolute peak, stage 6, decisions are made based on universal ethical principles, things like justice, dignity, equality. We're talking about figures like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr., people who followed their conscience even when it meant breaking the law and facing dire consequences. So, how do you actually climb this ladder? Kohlberg had a name for the engine that pushes us upward: moral disequilibrium. It's that uh-oh moment, that feeling of mental static you get when you run into a new problem and your old way of thinking just can't solve it. That discomfort, that friction, is what forces you to build a bigger, more complex way of looking at the world. Okay, so this theory was obviously huge, a real game changer. But like any great idea, it's not the final word. It kicked off a lot of debate, and some really important critiques have helped us get an even richer picture of morality. And maybe the most important critique came from another psychologist, Carol Gilligan. She looked at Kohlberg's work and basically said, hey, wait a minute. She pointed out that his research was done mostly on boys, and that might have created a blind spot. She argued that his ethics of justice was missing its other half, an ethics of care. So you've got Kohlberg's perspective, which is all about abstract rules, rights, and impartial principles. And then you have Gilligan's perspective, which focuses on empathy, relationships, and our responsibilities to the people we're connected to. And today, pretty much everyone agrees that you need both. Mature moral thinking involves both justice and care. And the critiques didn't stop there. Others pointed out that the latter seems to really favor Western individualistic values, maybe at the expense of collectivist values like community harmony. Plus, modern brain science shows us that our moral decisions aren't just cold, hard logic. Our emotions play a huge role. It's a constant dance between the rational and emotional parts of our brain. So, okay, with all those critiques, you might be asking, why is Kohlberg's theory still so important? Well, because even with its limitations, it completely revolutionized how we think about moral development, and it's still incredibly influential today. And this isn't just some dusty old theory. His ideas led to real things, like just community schools, where kids learn morality by actively helping to run their own school. It changed how we teach things like civics, encouraging real debate over just memorizing rules. And it even gives modern brain scientists a kind of roadmap for understanding how our brains learn to grapple with right and wrong. When you really boil it all down, Kohlberg's greatest legacy might just be this one powerful idea. You're never done growing. Your moral development doesn't just stop when you become an adult. So I'll leave you with a final thought, not about the theory, but about you. Your morality isn't fixed. So the real question is, what experience, what dilemma out there is waiting to challenge you to climb to the next rung? You know, we tend to think of ourselves as pretty self-contained, right? That our personality, our choices, that our whole development happens from the inside out. But what if I told you the most powerful forces shaping who you are aren't inside you at all? What if they're in your family, your neighborhood, even the era you were born into? Well, that's the big revolutionary idea we're diving in today. So let me just ask you straight up, what really makes you, you? Is it just your personality, your private thoughts and feelings, or are you maybe the product of something much, much bigger? For the longest time, the focus was all on the individual, as if we each existed in our own little bubble. But then this new way of thinking came along and said, hold on, we're not isolated islands. Instead, we're all caught in this incredibly complex web of influences: our family, our school, our culture, even the sweep of history itself. It's a total game changer in how we see ourselves. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll cover the big idea that you're not alone. Then we'll get into the 5 nested systems that make up this web. We'll look at your inner circles, then the outer layers. We'll talk about why this whole model even matters. And then, my favorite part, we'll turn this powerful lens on you and your own world. Okay, so the guy behind this whole thing was a psychologist named Yuri Bronfenbrenner. And he saw human development not as a one-way street, but as this constant back and forth, this conversation between a person and their environment. The takeaway? You are always shaping your world, and at the same exact time, your world is always shaping you. Now, to explain this, Bronfenbrenner came up with this really powerful metaphor. I want you to picture yourself at the center of a pond. Now imagine every major influence in your life is like a ripple spreading outward, and each of those ripples interacts with all the others. Let's explore these 5 nested layers one by one. And here they are. These are the 5 systems that are going to be our map today: the microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and the chronosystem, from your most immediate surroundings all the way to the influence of time itself. So let's start with the 2 innermost circles. These are the worlds you know best, the places and people you have direct, daily, face-to-face interactions with. This first layer, the one closest to you, is your microsystem. It's your immediate world, your family, your school, your closest friends, your neighborhood. This is where your day-to-day life happens. And here's the key thing to remember. The influence here is a two-way street. It's not just happening to you. Just look at this example with Samantha. It brings the idea to life perfectly, right? Her teacher gives her some praise, which boosts her motivation. Awesome. But it doesn't stop there. Samantha's new enthusiasm actually energizes the entire classroom, which then inspires the teacher even more. You see? It's this living, breathing feedback loop. Okay, on to the next layer, the mesosystem. Now, this isn't a new place. It's the connection between the different places in your microsystem. Think of it as the bridge that links your family life and your school life, or maybe your work life and your friend group. And let me tell you, the strength of those bridges is absolutely crucial. So what do these strong bridges actually look like? Well, it's when parents and teachers are on the same page and communicating. A child just thrives. It's when your friends feel welcomed in your family home, making you feel supported. A healthy mesosystem just means your different worlds are all working together, not constantly pulling you in opposite directions. All right, time to zoom out. Let's move to the outer layers, the ones that are way less visible, but trust me, just as powerful. These are the unseen forces that can literally define your opportunities and your challenges, often without you even realizing it. And this brings us to the exosystem. These are settings that you don't even directly participate in, but they still have a massive impact on your life. We're talking about a parent's stressful job, your city's public transit policies, or a decision made by your local school board. All of these things shape your world from a distance. Let's take Olivia's situation here. She never sat in on that budget meeting. She probably doesn't even know the administrators' names. But their decision, made in the ecosystem, has a direct, real-world effect on her daily life, on her ability to get support and succeed in her classes. Zooming out even further, we hit the macro system. You can think of this as the cultural blueprint for your entire society. It's the whole collection of laws, values, and customs that you share with everyone around you. Things like attitudes toward work, family, or what it even means to be successful. You could say it's the very water we're all swimming in. And finally, Bronfenbrenner added one more critical dimension that cuts across all the others, the chronosystem. This is simply the element of time. It's the reminder that you and all these systems we've talked about are constantly changing, both over the course of your own life and across history itself. I mean, just think about how much time changes everything. Growing up before the internet was a fundamentally different experience than growing up with it, right? A personal transition, like graduating from college, completely reshuffles all of your systems. And massive societal shifts, like a global pandemic or the rise of social media, create entirely new environments for all of us. So, okay, we've got this really elegant, kind of complex model. But what's the point? Why does any of this actually matter in the real world? Let's connect this theory to its actual impact. I think the most important part of this whole model is realizing that you are not just some passive object being bounced around by all these forces. You, the person, with your own unique personality and drive, are constantly interacting with these systems. The big takeaway is this: you are not just a product of your environment. You are an active co-creator of your own life. And here is proof that this kind of thinking actually changes lives. The famous Head Start program is a direct application of this theory. And it succeeded because it didn't just focus on the child sitting in the classroom. No, it supported the child's entire ecosystem, their family, their health, and that crucial bridge between home and school. Okay, now let's bring this all home. Let's take everything we've just learned and apply it to the person who matters most in this conversation. You. It's time to map your own world. Consider a student like Raj. This story just pulls it all together perfectly. His friends, his microsystem, are trying their best to help him out. But these invisible forces from the exosystem, like tuition hikes, and the macrosystem, like intense cultural pressure to succeed, are creating this enormous stress. His success isn't just up to him. It's a constant, delicate balancing act across every single one of these layers. So I'm going to leave you with this to really think about. Look beyond your immediate circle, beyond your day-to-day. What is the most powerful unseen force that's shaping your life right now? Is it a new policy at your job? A deep-seated cultural value you've never questioned? A major societal shift that's underway? Because identifying that system, well, that's the first step to truly understanding yourself.
Have you ever really stopped to think about where your thoughts come from? I mean, really think about it. Today we're diving into a pretty wild idea, that language doesn't just describe our world, it actually builds it. We're not just talking about words here. We're talking about the very blueprint of our minds.
It's a huge question, right? One we almost never ask ourselves. We've got this constant chatter going on inside our heads, a nonstop stream of consciousness. But what's the source? Is it just there, like the weather? Or is it something we build piece by piece, like a house?
You know, most of us assume language is just a tool, kind of like a microphone for thoughts that are already fully formed in our heads. But what if that's completely backward? A psychologist from the early 20th century, Lev Vygotsky, came along and flipped this whole idea on its head. He said no, the words we hear and speak are the actual bricks and mortar we use to construct our inner world. It's an absolutely game-changing idea.
So how in the world does that actually happen? How do conversations we have on the outside with our parents, our friends, our teachers literally become the voice inside our own heads? Well, in this first part, we're going to break down that incredible process.
The key concept, the magic word from Vygotsky, is internalization. It sounds a bit academic, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's this amazing transformation where speech that happens between people gets absorbed and becomes the silent thought happening inside one person. It's like downloading a social skill directly into your own private operating system.
Now, this whole journey from speaking to thinking, it's not like flipping a switch. It doesn't happen overnight. It's this fascinating process that unfolds as we grow up. So let's take a look at the stages of how our ability to talk literally evolves into our ability to think.
Vygotsky laid it out in 3 basic steps. First, when we're babies, we use social speech, right? Crying, babbling, it's all about communicating with others.
Then, as toddlers, we start using what he called private speech. And you've definitely seen this. It's when a kid talks to themselves out loud while they're playing or trying to figure something out. They're literally guiding themselves with their own voice. Finally, that little monologue goes quiet, it moves inside, and becomes inner speech, the silent engine of all our thinking and planning.
This little story about Amira is the perfect example. Her mom's instructions are a social tool, right? They exist between them. But when Amira whispers those same instructions to herself, cross the laces, make 2 loops, she's now using language as a personal tool. That's private speech in action. And after enough practice, she won't even need to whisper. Those instructions will have been fully internalized. They've just become a silent thought.
So if thought really does begin as conversation, that leads to a pretty profound conclusion. Our minds are fundamentally social. They don't just pop into existence in a vacuum. They're co-constructed, built in partnership with the people all around us. So let's dig into how that collaboration actually works. This quote right here, this is the absolute heart of Vygotsky's entire theory. What he's saying is that everything we learn to do inside our heads, whether it's reasoning, problem solving, or even just remembering, we first have to do it with someone else, on the outside. Learning happens between people before it can ever happen inside a person. Social first, then individual.
And Vygotsky had a special name for this collaborative learning space, the zone of proximal development, or ZPD. Don't worry about the term, the concept is what matters. It's not about what you already know. It's about what you're ready to learn with a little bit of help. It's the absolute sweet spot for growth.
Let's go right back to Amira. By herself, she can make a single simple knot. That's her current independent ability. But with her mom's help, she can tie a whole bow. Well, that gap, the space between the simple knot and the finished bow, that is her zone of proximal development, and it's the conversation and guidance that help her cross it.
So how exactly do we help someone cross that zone? Well, the how has a great name, scaffolding. And it's the perfect metaphor. Think about scaffolding on a building. It's temporary support. It's the hints, the questions, the little demonstrations that you give a learner. It's there just long enough for them to build the skill themselves, and then you take it away.
Now you might be thinking, okay, this is a really interesting theory from like 100 years ago. But here's the kicker, and this is what is so amazing. Modern neuroscience, with all of its incredible technology, is now confirming what Vygotsky figured out just by careful observation.
Okay, this is where it gets really cool. Modern science gives us hard evidence for these ideas. First off, brain scans show that the parts of our brain that handle language and the parts that handle complex reasoning aren't just neighbors, they're deeply connected. They literally light up together. Then there's the discovery of mirror neurons. These are amazing brain cells that fire not just when we do something, but also when we just watch someone else do it. It's like our brain practices by observing. And finally, look at bilingualism. Studies consistently show that learning another language, another social system of meaning, actually boosts our brain's overall cognitive flexibility. It's like a cross-training workout for your mind.
And you know what? This goes way beyond just learning skills. Our very sense of self, who we are, is shaped by this exact same process. We create our identity by telling stories about ourselves and by listening to the stories others tell about us. Through all that back and forth, we build what's called a narrative identity.
Take a look at Daniel here. He joins the debate club probably thinking it's all about winning arguments. But he quickly realizes that the act of defending his ideas, of having to respond to challenges, is actually forcing him to figure out what he really believes. His thoughts aren't just being expressed, they're being forged in the fire of that dialogue. He's literally thinking with other people to sharpen his own mind.
Okay, so this is all fascinating theory, but so what? What's the practical takeaway for you and me? Well, this isn't just for psychologists. It has huge implications for how we teach our kids, how we learn new things, and even how we handle our own day-to-day emotions.
Let's start right there, with emotions. There's this incredibly powerful tool called affect labeling. All it is putting your feelings into words, but the simple act of saying, okay, I am feeling overwhelmed right now, has a measurable calming effect on your brain. It actually quiets down your brain's fear center. When you do that, you're using an external tool, language, to manage your internal state. That's Vygotsky in action, right in your own life.
And in education? Oh man, the implications are just massive. The old-school traditional model sees a teacher as a lecturer and the student as sort of an empty bucket to be filled with facts. But a Vygotskian model flips that completely. The teacher becomes a facilitator, a guide. The student becomes an active collaborator. and the main event in the classroom shifts from quiet, solo memorization to active, vibrant conversation, what we call dialogic learning. So when you pull it all together, what you get is this powerful, and I think beautiful, new way of seeing our own minds. The brain isn't just some computer made of meat, it's a social organ. It wasn't designed to work alone in a dark room. It is fundamentally wired for connection, and it depends on that interaction to grow. We are, quite literally, built by each other and for each other.
And that really brings us to this final thought. Language isn't just some neat trick our species picked up along the way. It is the master tool. It's the instrument that allows us to build everything else: our knowledge, our cultures, our relationships, and our very selves.
So, we want to leave you with this one question to chew on. If it's true that our thoughts, our communities, and even our futures are all built out of dialogue, then what are the most important conversations we need to be having right now? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.
Have you ever wondered what really separates success from struggle? Well, it might not be what you think. Today, we're going to dive into emotional intelligence, this hidden force that shapes pretty much every decision, every relationship, and every learning experience we have.
This quote kind of flips a common idea on its head, right? We're often told to separate our emotions from our reason, but what if our feelings are actually the very foundation of clear thinking? That's the powerful idea we're going to explore today.
It's a huge question, isn't it? We spend so many years focused on IQ and book smarts. But what if this other dimension, our whole emotional landscape, is the real key to navigating our lives, our careers, and our relationships in a way that actually works?
Okay, so let's start by unpacking that idea. We're going beyond just book smarts to find this missing piece that's become so critical for understanding success and well-being.
So what is emotional intelligence exactly? Well, here's the key thing. It's not some fixed trait you're born with. It's a set of skills you can actually develop. It was first defined by researchers Salovey and Mayer and later made famous by Daniel Goleman. Basically, EI is the ability to perceive, understand, and skillfully manage our emotions to live better lives.
To really get a grip on this, we have to go way back, to the very beginning. Where does our emotional journey even start? Turns out, it begins the moment we're born.
This simple interaction, it's called affective communication. It's like the language of feelings before we even have words. A baby cries, a parent comforts. That little loop is the very first lesson in emotion. It teaches us that our feelings are seen, that they're valid, and that they can be managed. This builds what's known as a secure attachment, which becomes the emotional bedrock for the rest of our lives. And you can see on this timeline, these skills just build on each other. It starts at birth with co-regulation, a parent helping a child calm down. Then, in childhood, we learn to label emotions, turning a big, chaotic feeling into something we can understand, like sad or mad. By school age, we hit this huge milestone, perspective-taking, that amazing realization that other people can feel differently than we do.
So what's going on in our brains during all this? Let's simplify it with a metaphor. You've got the amygdala, which is like a super-fast, really sensitive smoke detector, your emotional alarm. It screams danger or reward. And then you have the prefrontal cortex, the thoughtful manager. That's the part that looks at the situation and says, okay, hold on. Is that actually smoke, or did someone just burn the toast? EI is really all about the dialogue between these two.
So how does this brain dynamic play out during the most emotionally turbulent time of all? The teenage years. There's a very real biological reason for the drama. The brain is literally a construction zone.
This slide shows the core issue perfectly. Look at the chart. Emotional reactivity, driven by that emotional alarm, is sky high. But impulse control, handled by the thoughtful manager, is still playing catch-up. This imbalance is exactly why a small social slight can feel like the end of the world to a teen, and why risky behavior can seem like a great idea at the time.
But this is also a period of incredible growth. Take the story of 16-year-old Lila. When she felt excluded, her first instinct was to lash out online, a pure emotional alarm reaction. But then, her developing manager kicked in. She reflected, she realized the impact, and she apologized. That's emotional intelligence in action, the messy but essential process of bridging the gap between a feeling and a choice.
So, as that thoughtful manager comes fully online, how do these skills translate into adulthood? This is where EI becomes a kind of superpower in our careers, our relationships, and our own well-being.
Daniel Goleman broke mature EI into 5 core pillars. It starts with self-awareness, knowing what you feel and why. Then self-regulation, managing those feelings, not being managed by them. Motivation, driving yourself toward a goal. Empathy, truly understanding how others feel. And finally, social skills, putting it all together to build strong connections.
Here's a perfect example. Marcus, a manager, is in a tense conflict with a colleague. His emotional alarm is going off. He feels defensive. But instead of just reacting, he engages his thoughtful manager. He takes a breath, he listens to his colleague's view, that's empathy, and works with them to find a solution. That is high-level EI in action.
So take a moment and think about it. The next time you're in a disagreement, can you pause and check in with yourself? That's self-awareness. Can you stop yourself from saying the first thing that comes to mind? That's self-regulation. Can you genuinely try to understand the other person's perspective? That's empathy. This is how you actually apply the framework.
And this isn't just theory. It's so important that we're now actively teaching it in schools through social-emotional learning. At Riverside Elementary, for example, a simple daily check-in circle where kids share their feelings led to less bullying and more cooperation. They are building emotional intelligence from the ground up.
Now let's bring this right into the present moment. How does emotional intelligence function in a world that's dominated by screens, social media, and remote communication?
Technology is truly a double-edged sword for our emotional lives. On one hand, texting and emails strip away all the tone and body language, making misunderstandings so much easier. Social media can become this highlight reel that fuels comparison and envy. But on the other hand, we have these incredible tools at our fingertips, apps that teach mindfulness, platforms for accessible therapy, and digital journals that help us practice self-awareness.
And if you're feeling like you're maybe a little behind in some of these areas, remember this: your brain is not fixed. Thanks to neuroplasticity, we can build new neural pathways our entire lives. Every time you pause before reacting or you try to see another person's perspective, you are literally rewiring your brain. This isn't just who you are. It's a skill you can practice for life.
So in the end, maybe this is what it all comes down to. Emotional intelligence isn't just about managing ourselves better. It's about using that inner understanding as a bridge to connect with the people around us. It transforms emotion from chaos into clarity and empathy into action. It's what makes us not just smarter, but more deeply and compassionately human.
From the second we're born, we have this deep, powerful drive to connect with other people. It's just a core part of being human. But have you ever stopped to wonder why? Why are these bonds so incredibly important? And how do they literally shape the person you are today?
Okay, let's just dive right into that. I mean, it's a huge question, right? This instinct to be close to others, it's something every single one of us feels. It's not just some nice idea, it's written into our biology. And the key to unlocking this whole thing, this powerful drive, well, it's found right at the beginning of our story, in our very first, most formative bonds. These initial connections pretty much set the stage for everything that comes after. And the name for this framework is attachment theory. Honestly, it's one of the most influential ideas in all of psychology. It's like a map that helps us understand how those first connections create a blueprint for the rest of our lives. So where did this game-changing idea even come from? Well, to get that, we've got to rewind to the middle of the 20th century, to a psychologist who was about to challenge everything people thought they knew about love and connection. And that psychologist's name was John Bowlby. He looked at the bond between parents and their children and saw something so much deeper, so much more profound than anyone had really given it credit for before. And this slide right here shows just how massive that shift in thinking really was. The old view was, pretty basic. Babies love their moms because they provide food. Simple. But Bowlby came along and said, nope, it's not about the food at all. He argued that attachment is this deep evolutionary instinct. It's a survival mechanism hardwired into us to keep a tiny, helpless baby close to a big, protective adult. And out of this came the absolutely brilliant concept of a secure base. Just picture a toddler, let's call him Noah, at a playground. He feels totally free to run off and explore the slide because he knows he can glance back and his mom will be right there watching him. She is his anchor, his secure base. And that balance, that dance between feeling safe and feeling free to explore, is the absolute bedrock of healthy development. So Bowlby laid all this incredible groundwork, but what do these bonds actually look like day to day?
Well, another pioneering psychologist took his ideas and brought them from the world of theory into observable reality. She figured out a way to actually see these patterns in action. And that psychologist was Mary Ainsworth. Her strange situation study is now legendary, and it was so clever in its simplicity. She just watched how toddlers reacted when their parent left them in a room for a few moments and then came back. Sounds simple, right? But the results were incredibly revealing.
From watching these kids, Ainsworth and another researcher named Mary Main identified 4 distinct patterns, or what we now call attachment styles. So a securely attached kid gets upset when mom leaves, but is quickly and easily comforted when she comes back. But the other styles, avoidant, anxious, and disorganized, they all show different ways of handling that stress, each one telling a story about the kind of care they've experienced.
Okay, so this is really the crucial point. All of these repeated interactions, the crying, the comforting, the connecting, they create what will be called an internal working model. The best way to think of it is like a subconscious rule book, a blueprint for relationships that gets written when we're very young. It shapes our deepest beliefs about whether others can be trusted and, just as important, whether we feel we're worthy of love. So what do these internal models actually sound like inside our own heads? Well, for an avoidant model, it might be a little voice that's always whispering, "It's safer to just rely on myself. People will let you down." An anxious model, on the other hand, might constantly be worrying, "I have to hold on tight to this person because love can just vanish." These are the powerful, invisible scripts that can run our lives. Now, this isn't just a story about babies. Not at all. These early patterns have a really long reach. They create a ripple effect that touches literally every stage of our lives. And this timeline shows it perfectly. Our fundamental need for a secure base for that safe person, it never goes away. It just evolves. Who fills that role changes over time. When we're infants, it's our parents. Then as we grow, teachers and friends become really important. And for most of us in adulthood, our primary attachment figure becomes a romantic partner. The faces change, but that core need for secure connection, it's always there. And of course, those internal models we talked about, they come right along with us into adulthood. Think about someone like Sophia, who always struggles to really trust her partners. That's not just a random quirk, it's the echo of an old childhood blueprint. Her story is a perfect example of how these patterns play out. But it also shows, and this is so important, that once we understand them, we can start to change that. Which brings us to the absolute most hopeful part of this whole story, the fact that we can change. Modern science is showing us that these bonds aren't just in our heads, they are biological. They're in our bodies. And because of that, we actually have the power to rewire them. Let's just geek out on the brain for a second. Attachment isn't just a nice idea, it's a physical reality. When we feel connected to someone, our brains get a hit of reward chemicals like dopamine. Oxytocin, you've probably heard of it as the bonding hormone. It floods our system and helps us trust. We even do this incredible thing called biobehavioral synchrony, where our heart rates and stress hormones literally sync up with the people we love. So these bonds don't just feel good, they're physically building a stronger, more resilient brain. So this all leads to the one question that really, truly matters for every single one of us. Are we just stuck with the blueprint we were handed as a kid? And the answer, which is backed up by decades of amazing research, is a clear, powerful, and resounding no. Your early attachment style is your starting point. It is not your destiny. And this is possible because of an amazing concept called earned security. It means exactly what it sounds like. Even if you didn't have a secure start in life, you can earn a secure attachment style as an adult. You do it by revising that old internal rulebook with new, healthier, more positive experiences. And this isn't just wishful thinking. There are actual concrete pathways to get there. It all starts with self-awareness, just starting to recognize your patterns without judging yourself for them. From there, you can actively look for what are called corrective experiences, basically new relationships that prove the old negative rules wrong. For deeper work, there are incredible therapies like emotionally focused therapy that are designed specifically to reshape these internal models. And you can even learn through things like mindfulness to become your own secure base. In the end, it really all comes back to this one simple but profound truth from the man who started it all. John Bowlby's words remind us that needing other people isn't a weakness, it's our greatest strength.
Our first bonds, they write the opening chapters of our life story, for sure. But they absolutely do not write the ending. At every single age, secure and loving relationships act like scaffolding that allows us to keep growing, to heal, and to become the absolute best version of ourselves. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question to mull over. Take a look at the important bonds in your own life, both past and present. What story do your connections tell about you? And maybe more importantly, what story do you want them to tell next? You know, it's probably one of the biggest questions we ever face, especially during times of big change. It's this one single question that sits at the very heart of, well, everything. Who am I? So today, let's dive into that search for self. Yeah, let's just start right there. I'll ask you directly, who are you? I mean, it sounds so simple, right? But answering it, that's one of the great adventures of our lives. It's this whole journey of figuring out what we truly value, what we believe in our core, and, where we actually fit in the world. So where do you even start with a quest that big? Well, luckily we've got some guides, and our first one is the brilliant psychologist Erik Erikson. You can think of him as creating the foundational map, the blueprint, for understanding how we even begin to build our identity. So Erikson, he framed the core challenge of this whole period as identity versus role confusion. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's this critical tug of war, right? On one side, you have this drive to explore everything, to build a solid, coherent sense of who you are. And on the other side, well, there's that feeling of being completely lost, just adrift, totally uncertain about where you're even heading. This story about Jordan is a perfect example of what the ideal outcome looks like. So Jordan starts out with two interests that seem pretty separate, business and activism. The whole journey for them is about bringing those two things together, integrating those passions into one single vision. That's the goal here. It's all about weaving the different threads of your life into one single, strong identity. Okay, so if Erikson gave us the map, our next guide, James Marshaw, who was actually one of Erikson's students, he's the one who gave us the compass. He took that big foundational idea and broke it down into something super practical. 4 distinct paths that people tend to take on this identity journey. And Marsh's whole model, it's built on just 2 key ideas. First, you've got exploration. Pretty straightforward. How much have you really looked around? How many different options have you actually considered for your life? And then second, you've got commitment. So to what degree have you actually made some firm decisions about your values, your goals, your future? Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. The crucial part is seeing how these 2 things, exploration and commitment, combine. Because depending on whether your levels for each are high or low, you'll fall into one of 4 identity statuses, as he called them. So let's break down what each one of these actually feels like. All right, first up, we have identity diffusion. This is when both exploration and commitment are low. You're not really looking for answers, and you definitely haven't committed to any particular path. Does this sound familiar? It's that classic feeling of just floating. You might not be sure what to major in, you're not really thinking about the future, and honestly, you might not feel all that motivated to figure it out right now. It's just a state of uncertainty. Okay, path number 2 is identity foreclosure. Now, this is interesting because commitment is high, but exploration has been super low. Basically, you've committed to an identity, but you didn't really do the legwork of exploring the options for yourself. Maria's story is the perfect example here. She's got a clear path. She's going into medicine, but it's a path that was chosen for her, not by her. And look, this can feel really secure, totally stable, but the identity itself is being defined by outside forces, like her family's expectations, instead of her own personal passion. All right, now for path 3, identity moratorium. And this is basically the polar opposite of foreclosure. Here, exploration is high, but commitment is low. You are actively searching, you're questioning everything, you're experimenting with different things. I mean, this is the classic college experience for so many people, right? Ethan here is in what Marcia would call a crisis. But, and this is important, we're not talking about a catastrophe. It's more like a turning point. Yeah, he's unsettled for sure, but he's doing the really hard, really necessary work of meaningful self-exploration. And that brings us to our final path, identity achievement. You can think of this as the resolution. This is where you've got high exploration and high commitment. You've done the work, you've looked at your options, and you've made choices that are authentically, truly your own. Aisha's journey here really shows us the destination. She went through that whole period of exploration. And out of that exploration, she forged a real commitment. And the result? It's that feeling of purpose, of confidence, that inner drive. Her identity feels solid, because she's the one who built it. Okay, so that's the classic framework. But let's be real. How does this whole journey play out in a world that looks so different from when Erickson and Marcy were writing this stuff? We need to talk about the unique challenges of forming an identity today. I mean, the search for identity today means you're navigating a way more complex landscape. Take globalization. It gives us endless options, which sounds amazing, but it can also lead to this paradox of choice, where you're just paralyzed. Or think about shifting cultural norms. The old rigid paths are gone, which is great for freedom, but it can also leave you feeling like you don't have any guideposts. And then, of course, there's the huge pressure of digital media, this constant need to present a perfect curated version of yourself on Instagram or TikTok. It just dials up the performance anxiety and the social comparison to a whole new level. And all of this leads to a really modern problem, something we could call identity fragmentation, right? The pressure to be this person on Instagram and that person on LinkedIn and a whole other person with your family. It can make your sense of self feel like it's been shattered into a dozen little pieces. And that makes building that single coherent identity that Erickson talked about way, way harder.
So with all of that in mind, what's the one big idea you should take away from all this? There's this one crucial insight that completely reframes the whole process.
This right here is the game changer. It's a total paradigm shift. You don't find your identity like you're looking for lost car keys. No, you build it, piece by piece. Through your choices, your experiences, your reflections, it is an active, hands-on process of creation. And because you're the one building it, it's never really finished. Think of it like a living thing. Your journey through those 4 statuses we talked about, it's not a one-way street. Life is going to throw new stuff at you, and you might find yourself right back in that moratorium phase, re-exploring and revising who you are. And listen, that is not a failure. That's what growth looks like. So we kind of end up right back where we started, but hopefully with a totally new perspective. The question isn't just a passive, who are you? It's something much more active, much more empowering. It's a question that puts all the tools right in your hands and asks, okay, with everything you now know about this journey, how will you choose to live? What will you decide to build?
We have this idea that adulthood is kind of the finish line, right? It's the point where we've finally arrived. But what if that's all wrong? What if adulthood is actually the starting pistol for our most profound, most interesting journey of growth? Let's dive into this idea that your life is a story that is very much still being written. So, I want you to ask yourself this question, seriously, right now. When you think about your career, your relationships, how you see the world, are you a finished product? Is this it? Or is there more to come?
For the longest time, the story we were told was that we do all our growing up as kids and teenagers. And then, adulthood is just this long, stable plateau where you kind of coast. Turns out, that whole idea is just not true.
Yeah, so psychologists now see adulthood as this wide-open, ongoing journey, not some static destination you just arrive at. The whole concept of a finished self is basically out the window. Instead, what they see is this continuous, fascinating process of learning, reflecting, and totally redefining who we are over and over again.
Thinkers way back, like Erik Erikson, they actually started this whole shift. He was one of the first to map out these core challenges that we all face deep into our adult lives. Things like finding true intimacy or creating something that will outlast us, a legacy. He proved that some of our most important developmental work happens long, long after our teenage years are over.
And that brings us to this really key idea, lifelong learning. This isn't just about taking a night class or picking up a hobby. No, it's a fundamental psychological need. You can think of it as the engine that drives our ability to adapt to a world that's always changing and a self that's always evolving.
Okay, so to help us understand this journey, let's bring in our first guide. He's a psychologist named Daniel Levinson, and he created this incredible map that shows these predictable patterns, these seasons, that most of us move through in our adult lives. So here is Levinson's core idea. Our lives don't just move in one straight line. Nope, they unfold in cycles. We spend a while building a stable life structure, the career, the family, the place we live, and then bam, we hit a transition period where we feel this deep drive to question all of it and reevaluate everything.
And here you can see those key transitions laid out.
It starts with leaving home and figuring out what our dream even is. Then you hit that classic age 30 transition where you start to rethink all those early choices. Then comes the midlife transition, a search for deeper purpose. The point Levinson makes is that these moments of shakeup and change, they aren't failures. They are absolutely necessary opportunities for renewal.
Let's make this real for a second. Meet Priya. At 32, she's right on schedule for what Levinson called the age 30 transition. That restless feeling she has in her career, that's not a sign she messed up. It's a signal. It's her developing self telling her it's time to realign with something more authentic, something with more meaning.
So Levinson gave us this map of the external seasons of our lives. But what is going on inside our minds during all these shifts? Well, that's where psychologist Robert Keegan comes in. He shows us how the very way we make sense of the world, our consciousness itself, evolves over time.
Keegan's big idea is this. Adult growth isn't about what you know. It's about how you know. It's not about learning more facts. It's about upgrading your entire internal operating system, the very framework you use to make sense of your life and the world around you. Now, for most of us, the single biggest leap we make in adulthood is moving from what Keegan calls the socialized mind to the self-authoring mind. This is a huge journey, from having your identity defined by what others expect of you to defining yourself from the inside out. Some folks even go further, to the self-transforming mind, where you can actually step back and see the limits of your own system. Just look at the difference here. It's massive. The socialized mind says, I am a teacher, I am a mother, I am a Republican. Your identity is fused with the role. But the self-authoring mind says, I have the role of a teacher, but I am guided by my own internal compass. It's a huge power shift from looking outside for approval to looking inside for authenticity.
And here's a perfect example. Miguel. For years, he just followed the rules of his profession, the established models. But at 45, he starts to question those things and build his own teaching philosophy. See the shift? He's no longer just an actor playing a part in someone else's system. He's becoming the author of his own work. That is the self-authoring mind in action.
Okay, so we've got the external seasons of change and the internal shifts in how we think. But what actually triggers these big leaps in growth? Our final guide, Jack Mezirow, gives us the answer. And it's pretty simple. It's life's challenges. Mezirow called this incredible process transformative learning. And he said that real growth is sparked by what he called a disorienting experience. Think about it. A job loss, a divorce, a major move, even just an idea in a book that completely shatters your old beliefs. These things aren't just setbacks. They are powerful invitations to grow.
And it's not just random chaos. There's a process. First, we have to do some critical reflection. We have to question why our old beliefs just don't fit anymore. Then we talk it out. We test these new ideas with people we trust. And finally, and this is the most important part, we take action. We integrate this new, harder-won wisdom into how we actually live our lives.
And get this process of transformation isn't just some abstract psychological concept. It is physically happening inside your brain. Modern neuroscience shows us that our brains are not fixed. Thanks to something called neuroplasticity, your brain can literally form new connections and pathways your entire life. In fact, learning new stuff releases dopamine, which makes you want to learn even more.
I mean, just look at someone like Harriet. At 68, she's not just picking up a new hobby. She is actively rewiring her brain. And she's using the wisdom she's accumulated over a lifetime, her patience, her unique creative vision, to master something new. It just goes to show you, growth has absolutely no age limit.
So let's take a step back and pull all these threads together. When you look at all these theories side by side, what you get is this incredibly rich, multi-dimensional picture of what it really means to be a developing adult. Each of these thinkers gives us a different lens, a different piece of the puzzle. Erickson shows us the core challenges, Levinson maps out the timeline, Keegan reveals the evolution happening inside our minds, and Mezirow explains the triggers that spark it all. But you know what? They all point to the exact same powerful truth. Adulthood is a dynamic, ongoing process of becoming.
And let's be clear, this isn't just some abstract theory. In the world we live in today, where you might have 5 different careers and technology changes every single year, the ability to learn, adopt, and reinvent yourself isn't just a nice bonus. It is the essential survival skill for modern life.
Ultimately, all of this leads to one incredibly empowering conclusion, and Robert Keegan just captured it perfectly. We are not simply shaped by experience, we shape experience. Life isn't something that just happens to you. You are an active participant. You have the power to make meaning, to interpret, and to shape your own experience. So the only real question left is for you. Knowing that you are not a finished product, knowing that your story is still being written, and that you are the one holding the pen, what will your next chapter be?
For centuries, we've been trying to figure out how we become who we are. For a long time, we pictured it as a simple staircase, one predictable step after another. But what if that whole map is wrong? In this explainer, we're going to explore a completely different way of looking at development, not as a ladder, but as a living, breathing ecosystem.
So, you've got these two big ideas, right? On one hand, there's this idea of a predictable staircase. Step 1, then step 2, then step 3. All very neat and orderly. But then there's this other idea. What if it's not so linear? What if it's way more like a complex, living ecosystem, with all these moving parts influencing each other all at once?
To really get where we're going with this, we first have to understand where we've been. So let's start with that classic staircase model.
And you can totally see why this staircase idea was so popular, right? It was simple, it was structured, and it basically gave us a map for growing up. It suggested that at certain ages, you're going to face certain challenges or develop specific skills. It made the whole incredibly complex business of being human feel, well, a little more manageable.
So who were the architects behind this idea? Let's meet the brilliant thinkers who literally drew up the first blueprints for human growth.
Okay, so let's break this down. You had people like Freud, who was all about our deep emotional world. Then Piaget came along and mapped out how our actual thinking abilities unfold. Vygotsky pointed out, and this is huge, just how much we learn from other people. Erikson said, hey, this journey doesn't stop in childhood, it's a lifelong thing. And Kohlberg zeroed in on how our moral compass develops. Each one added a different step, and together they built that foundational staircase.
But here's the thing. What happens when the map doesn't quite match the real-life territory? Well, this is where the story gets really fascinating.
Modern science started asking some pretty tough questions, like does everyone really follow the same steps in the exact same order? Is it possible to go backwards sometimes? And what about the massive influence of our culture, or even just our biology? It became pretty clear that a simple, straight line just doesn't capture the dynamic, messy, and beautiful reality of how we actually grow. And this single idea, this really says it all. It represents a massive shift in how we look at our own lives. We're moving away from a fixed, predictable path and toward a model that is alive, interactive, and constantly adapting. So this new model has a name, integrative developmentalism. And the key word there is integrative. It doesn't just throw out those old stage theories. No way. It builds on them. It sees our growth as this incredible, constant dance between our biology, our mind, our relationships, and the culture all around us.
Okay, so this ecosystem idea sounds cool, but what does it actually look like? How do all these different systems connect? A psychologist named Yuri Bronfenbrenner gave us a really powerful way to picture this. Think of it like a set of those Russian nesting dolls. At the very center, that's you. The first doll out, your microsystem, that's your immediate world, your family, your close friends, your school. The next doll, the mesosystem, is how all those parts connect. Think of a parent-teacher conference. And that biggest, outermost doll? That's the macro system, the culture, values, and history you're living in. We're not developing in a vacuum. We're a system within all these other systems.
Now, two major discoveries really power this whole ecosystem model. First up is neuroplasticity. This is the mind-blowing idea that our brains aren't fixed. They physically rewire themselves based on our experiences. It's basically the biological engine of our ecosystem. And second, there's cultural pluralism. This is the understanding that there's no single correct way to develop. Different cultures create different equally valid pathways to becoming a mature adult.
And of course, our modern ecosystem has a powerful new layer that the original pioneers could never have possibly imagined: technology.
I mean, just think about it. Social media, AI, virtual communities, these aren't just tools we use anymore, are they? They've become a core part of our world, just as fundamental as our family or our neighborhood. This digital environment is actively shaping how we see ourselves and how we connect with other people.
And this new digital layer in our ecosystem is a true double-edged sword. On one hand, it gives us these incredible opportunities to connect and learn. But on the other hand, it brings a whole new set of challenges, like the anxiety that comes from constant social comparison or the never-ending battle for our own attention. But here's the good news. This integrated understanding is already transforming fields like education. We're seeing the rise of learning environments that don't just focus on cramming facts. Instead, they aim to develop the whole person, blending cognitive, emotional, and social growth. A great example is a university course that might combine neuroscience with philosophy and art to explore not just how we think, but what it really means to be human.
So, let's bring it all home. What is this journey? From a simple staircase to a complex ecosystem, what does it really mean for us, day to day?
Well, it means we've gone from a basic two-dimensional blueprint to a dynamic, three-dimensional living model of human potential. That original map was absolutely essential. It gave us our bearings. But now we can see the full, rich, and ever-changing landscape of our own development.
And that brings us to the most empowering takeaway of all. We are not just passive products of some predetermined stages. We are active participants. We're constantly interacting with our environment, our relationships, and our culture to shape who we become. In other words, we're co-authors of our own life story. This integrated view sees development not just as something that happens over time, but as the art of becoming fully human in a world that is always evolving. It's an ongoing creative process. So the final question isn't about what stage you're in, it's about the story you're creating. So, what will be the next chapter you write?
You know, for centuries, we've thought about human development as this process shaped by our families, our schools, our communities, the world right around us. But what if I told you that the very environment our minds grow up in has fundamentally changed? Today, we're diving into how technology is creating an entirely new ecosystem for what it means to be human. And this, right here, is the question we're all starting to ask. I mean, this isn't some far-off future anymore, is it? It's right now. Artificial intelligence isn't just an abstract idea. It's become a daily partner in how we learn, how we think, and even how we form our identities. So let's really break down what that means.
And to do that, we need to get our heads around this key concept, the technological ecosystem of the mind. Think of it this way. Our minds are no longer just developing in the natural world. They're growing up inside a digital environment, a whole ecosystem filled with algorithms, AI companions, and even tools that can plug directly into our brains.
Okay, so to see how this actually works in the real world, let's start in a place we all know pretty well, the classroom. Because this is where one of the biggest and maybe one of the most exciting transformations is already happening. Now, to really understand how AI is changing education, we gotta look back at a classic idea from psychology called the zone of proximal development, or ZPD. It's basically that sweet spot in learning where something's just a little too hard to do on your own, but you can totally get it with a little help from a mentor, what the psychologist Lev Vygotsky called a more knowledgeable other. And this is where AI is stepping right into that mentor role. So take someone like Amara, a 14-year-old in Kenya. She's using this AI math app that's watching her mistakes in real time, figuring out why she's making them, and then giving her explanations that are perfectly tailored to her learning style. For Amara, that AI is her more knowledgeable other, guiding her through her own personal learning zone. You see, a great human teacher gives you what's called adaptive scaffolding. They give you just enough support to stand on, and then they pull it away as you get stronger. What's absolutely revolutionary is that AI tutors can now do the exact same thing. But they do it with algorithms, constantly tweaking the feedback, the pace, and the difficulty based on tons of data. This kind of personalization is incredibly powerful. It's expanding access to amazing education all over the globe. But having this constant digital filter between us and what we're learning, it definitely raises a huge question. What is this actually doing to our brains? And that very question is why a whole new field of study has popped up, digital cognition. Right now, researchers are scrambling to understand how growing up online is fundamentally reshaping everything, from our ability to focus to the way we remember things, and even to how we see ourselves in the mirror. So, this brings us to our next big idea. Because we're moving beyond just the learning software and into the wild world of directly enhancing the hardware. Yeah, I'm talking about the human brain itself. Welcome to the Neuroenhancement Toolbox. And no, these are not props from a sci-fi movie. This stuff is real. We're talking about brain-computer interfaces that literally connect your mind to a machine,
neurofeedback systems that let you train your own brainwaves, and even stimulation techniques that are designed to boost your memory.
To make this real, just picture a university lab. A bunch of grad students are testing a BCI that helps them study by boosting their working memory. And guess what? It works. But, and this is a big but, there's a catch. It also leads to some pretty serious emotional fatigue. And this really shows the central tension in this whole new frontier.
This experience led the researchers to ask a really fundamental question, one that gets to the very heart of the issue. Should we be trying to optimize the brain like it's a machine, or should we be nurturing it like it's a delicate ecosystem? Okay, let's pull back from the biological brain for just a second and look at the more philosophical idea of the mind. Because let's be honest, for many of us, our minds no longer stop at our skulls. They extend right into the phones in our hands.
And there's a name for this. It's the theory of the extended mind. It basically suggests that when you use your phone to remember a birthday, or you use a search engine to answer a question, that device isn't just a separate tool. In that moment, it has become a literal extension of your own mind, an external piece of your cognitive process.
Now, think about what this means for how we form our identity. The famous psychologist Erik Erikson talked about the identity crisis of our teenage years as this process of figuring out our role in the physical social world. But today, that whole process happens in what researchers are calling hybrid ecologies, this constant mashup of offline and online experiences that shape not just our social selves, but our digital selves too.
So we've seen how this new ecology affects our learning, our brains, and our identities. Now, let's zoom all the way out to the biggest picture possible, how we as a species are literally co-evolving right alongside our technology. As these incredibly powerful developmental tools get more and more common, we run smack into a major ethical roadblock, the digital divide. I mean, if these technologies offer a real cognitive advantage, what happens to the communities and the people who get left behind? Making sure everyone has access is one of the most urgent issues of our time, for sure. All of this creates this powerful co-evolutionary path. It's a feedback loop. First, we study how humans learn. Then, we build AI to try and copy that process. But then, in a strange twist, that AI becomes a mirror that teaches us more about ourselves. It's like we're in this constant dance where we shape our tools, and then our tools turn around and shape us.
And the ultimate goal of this entire journey is, well, it's truly mind-bending. The new frontier isn't just about making smarter AI. It's about designing artificial developmental systems. We're talking about creating an AI that doesn't just know a bunch of stuff, but that actually learns and plays and grows through experience, a lot like a human child does.
So at the end of the day, technology is no longer separate from our development. It is our development. We are now active pilots in guiding our own evolution. And this leaves us with one final and probably the most important question we could ask. As we steer that course, how do we make absolutely sure that the growth we design for ourselves and for our machines remains deeply grounded in empathy, in wisdom, and in our own humanity?